The first Stealing Bananas draft of the year. That's what we're talking about today on Stealing Bananas. I'm Ben Gretch. You can find the Stealing Signals newsletter at bengretch.substack.com. With me, as always, is Shawn Siegele. You can find all of his great work over at RotoViz. Shawn, we are going to do an underdog draft here when we get it filled. You are currently in a lobby. We're waiting on a few names. We're gonna draft it. This isn't live. I had floated to you an idea of wanting to talk through some of the early ADP stuff because I have seen some of it. Obviously, longtime listeners will know that I can't do the underdog drafts in my state, and so I don't do a lot of drafting this time of year. But I'd seen some of the stuff, and I felt like there were some sort of exploitable or interesting spots. I don't have a bunch of thoughts in that direction on my mind right now. I just got back from a vacation and I got sick on that vacation, been sick the last few days. So I haven't really looked at any of this stuff in what's now been like a week and a half or 2 weeks since I left on that vacation. Was writing some stuff at the newsletter prior to that and found some stuff. You just showed me a little draft that you had done already and looked at some stuff. The big thing basically that I was going to say here in the intro is we decided to just do it as a draft rather than talk about ADP, but we're kind of going to just play the actual strategy side of it very loose in terms of like stacking and all of those things. We're kind of just talking about the player values and where they are in February, what we think is high and low and what sticks out to us. For me, mostly will be just veterans. I haven't done really any rookie research yet. You and the guys have released the RotoViz rookie guide. Always a very important get for the listeners this time of year. You may have some rookie takes as we go through. Maybe we'll grab a couple rookies in our draft. I won't know much more than a few of the names in terms of the profiles and those things, but we'll talk through some of it. We'll do a draft and then probably talk about the board afterward quite a bit. It looks like it just filled though. So how you doing? We got the first pick.
We do. We have the first pick. It's going to start here in 20 seconds. Ooh, we are on the clock. Ben, Bijan Robinson or Jahmyr Gibbs?
I'm fine either way. I saw some stuff that suggested that Bijan has to be the number one. I think that's silly. I think these guys are in a tier of two for sure. But it looks like by ADP, his ADP is 1.1. Gibbs is 2.4. So it seems like Bijan's going one in almost every draft.
Yeah, so you go ahead and take him there to get some exposure. Again, that's not really the way that we're looking at this. And I want to emphasize that we're not doing best ball strategy, tactics, what have you. We're not worrying too much about stacking. We're talking about the players. And so it really does get us into this early and interesting conversation. And one of the things that has come up, Ben, is this idea that the Lions might be on the way to a divorce with David Montgomery. I guess I'm surprised that Bijan Robinson does have so much behind him when you have a coordinator change and when Gibbs might now be freed up to, really go, right? To have one of those seasons where full PPR, maybe you're challenging 27, 28 points per game. Marshall Faulk has demonstrated that you can hit 30 in a full PPR format.
Bijan's fantastic. No one's dogging him, but I completely agree. We have the coordinator change element, and we have the potential or maybe likelihood that David Montgomery is gone, as you said. I mean, it's just straightforward. Gibbs should be the number one pick, in my opinion. This happens every year in best ball. The number one pick gets like the 1.1 ADP because everyone's like, I'll have to get my exposure. Same thing happened last year with Chase. And I remember saying repeatedly that Chase was in a tier with the guys behind him, was not. And I even compared it to the year prior where Lamb was the clear-cut number one coming off a career season. Chase had another great year, but he was coming off a career season in 2024 that probably made him the justifiable 101. But then everyone says, I want to get my Chase builds. I want to get my Chase exposure. This is, I think, the third or fourth year running now where the number one player just becomes has to be the number one pick in every single draft pick because everyone who's drafting at this point in time is building a little bit of a portfolio and they're not really willing to not have exposure because by not taking Bijan, you're fading Bijan. You're not going to get him at 2, but you can get Gibbs at 2. But as far as the actual like just ranking straightforwardly, I mean, would you take Bijan over Gibbs?
Well, I asked you this question after one of the monster Gibbs games down the stretch last year. Like, would there ever be another draft ever again where you didn't take Jahmyr Gibbs?
Where he was available and I didn't take him. I remember it. I was thinking about it right now when we just took Bijan over him. I said no. I didn't think there would.
Now, after that, we had one of those all-time games from Robinson in Week 17, which that's certainly something that people are thinking about, have top of mind as they get into the 2026 season. Then we're not just talking about our picks today. We kind of want to look at the values overall. I'm going to give you the whole board again here after we make our 2 picks. But we have 2 relatively unappetizing picks at 24 and 25 here, with Brock Bowers going at 21. Pickens, Collins, Olave, the top wide receivers. Josh Jacobs, Bucky Irving, Breece Hall, Kenneth Walker, the top running backs. Kind of looks like a timeout or what have you there with Pickens, maybe just my internet. He goes, who do you like here?
Maybe Bucky or Breece. I think, or Kenneth Walker. I don't know which, like where I don't know what direction you like to go, but you had just told me in one of the drafts you did recently that it was hard to get running backs. And I mean, maybe Nico for me would be the receiver here. I don't know. What are you thinking?
Yeah, let's go with another running back. We'll do the Breece Hall pick. He seems like he's going to go back to the Jets, which in many ways is pretty unfortunate. Kenneth Walker, as a guy who, as we draft, we don't know the location. His sensational playoff stretch is now pushing him back up into the range where I would argue that he always should have been going, but I mean, he wasn't scoring like a player who should be in this range when you look at the full season numbers. Now, Breece Hall, not really either, but you have a very different situation coming up for this next year with the New York Jets. I would argue that with Bucky Irving getting the coordinator that just did those things with Bijan Robinson and them talking up Irving as the guy in the passing game who, again, can fill that type of role, and then you look at the overall talent level for a Breece Hall, being able to start Robinson, Irving, Hall, again, thinking just about quality of team, especially when the 2-3 turn is not particularly powerful, I think it's a pretty exciting start.
Yeah, I like the really heavy running back start there based on who was sort of available to us. I see A.J. Brown goes 5 picks into the 3rd round. There's obviously been talk about him being traded. I think that's probably a good value for me because I think people were happy to take him much, much higher with the Eagles. And I've been saying for the last couple of years, that's tough with the Eagles, systemic issues from a passing volume and passing game standpoint. But if that's sort of the floor, and then I mean, he had his worst year from like a per route basis and all that, but to me, pretty clearly was effort impacted. And so you talk about getting him in the middle of the 3rd round seems pretty interesting. Nico going 304. That's the you said pretty unappetizing picks. We take Bucky Irving and Breece Hall there. I think pretty clearly Collins, A.J. Brown. Then you go later into that round, you have Kenneth Walker. Rashee Rice at the very end of that round is a group that I think you could argue could also be in the same tier as Bucky and Breece Hall. Some of the other picks, because again, this for me is like sort of the first time I've seen some of the ADP, honestly, in action. Malik Neighbors going 204, rehabbing that ACL. Man, Justin Jefferson going 201. I still think those are guys that are probably 1st-round wide receivers. We don't really know how healthy Neighbors is going to be, but especially the Jefferson thing, I think that quarterback situation has to get improved. To get Justin Jefferson in the 2nd round feels a little bit unfair, just in general.
Do you have some obvious guys you think who he should be going ahead of there?
That's a little trickier. I would take him over Genty, who went 111. Amarian Hampton there goes 112. Really like the McDaniel coordinator change there. Achane was at 110, I saw there, without McDaniel. I mean, man, I just don't think they're going to go a whole season with J.J. McCarthy again, but that's reading the tea leaves a little bit. So you're filling up the queue here at the 4-5 turn. Travion Henderson, Luther Burden, RJ Harvey, all of those year two guys that, I mean, so the Burden thing is interesting to me. Really, really good per route stuff. Didn't run a ton of routes. Do you have concerns about the limited amount of actual playing time that this guy got last year?
Yeah, I do. I think it's weird that he is this expensive, and yet you look at where the upside would come from. You think about how bad the other receivers were. There's a lot of projection in that price. But the next names are Carnell Tate, Christian Watson. So one of the issues that we'll run into, we talk about here in a second, is how if you don't take.
Oh, we got our first time out of the year. We got Travion Henderson at the 412. That's all right. We're not really particularly worried about this draft. I was going to say,
right, so I take Henderson and then take Burden with that second pick there. Harvey and Scadaboo, other interesting names. The structure of it probably works best if you take receivers in the 2-3 area, or at least one, right? Because you actually do have the three fun names in Scadaboo, Henderson, and Harvey. And then once you get through this, though, it is completely wiped out. Getting back to the question there with Burden, I mean, because those other guys were so bad, because he was efficient, and because you have this second year potential, there's a lot of projection in it, and yet the ceiling there, very, very exciting. And you contrast that with the two elite rookies in Tate and Lemon. We don't know where they're going to be. I don't think that they're as elite as what you would get from the top wide receivers in most years. Again, check out the rookie guide on that. Kevin has done an absolutely sensational job with it. And certainly when you're thinking about Christian Watson and Rome Odunze as being the next veterans, I mean, that's very underwhelming.
Yeah, that is not a tandem that I want to be taking in at the 4-5 turn. Odunze had a really, really rough year, coming off a pretty rough rookie year. There was an early part of the season where people were really excited about Odunze's touchdown scoring. I think he left a lot out there. And if you're talking about where this offense goes forward, he could be good. I think he could be a small win in this price range, as we like to talk about, but it's a tough price to pay for a guy that looks like he's probably, I mean, the concern with him as a 4-year player coming out and being a top pick was that he would be somewhat similar to like the Corey Davis career, where Corey Davis was always good in the NFL level, but he was never a great elite player worthy of a top 10 overall pick. I do think that's probably what the first 2 years of Rome Odunze suggests. You're going to probably get a lot of routes. He's going to play a lot of football. He's in a good offense. There's reasons to be excited, but you're never going to talk about a guy producing at the level of, the top receivers, the guys that go in the first couple of rounds, even the top 3 rounds. And I know in this range, it's tough. There's not a lot of receiver depth, as you were talking about, but this is a tough price to pay when you're trying to think about the ways. Ultimately, what I'm saying is you probably want to be building structures where you're not taking a receiver there. It gets back to your point where we should have taken one at the 2-3 turn, and then we could have taken running backs more at the 4-5 turn. I don't love the Burden price either. I was telling you to grab him just because I felt like probably whatever structurally. We were talking about not really worrying about structure, but structurally probably after starting with the 3 running backs, you did want to take some receivers. Or the guy that was sticking out to me was Lamar Jackson as well, going at the 4-5 turn now. I mean, we know what his ceiling looks like in a full season. He has a bad year last year. Now you get a little bit of a discount. We are back on the clock. Yeah, I mean, I'm good any direction you want to go here. You have Fannin in the queue. Certainly content grabbing him. And we went ahead and grabbed him. And then who are the other receivers? You got Pearsall. You got Michael Wilson in there ahead of Marvin Harrison. They're both Harrison is the top available by ADP. And I'm comfortable with the Pearsall pick. Oh, you're taking another running back? Oh, no. I think you just took another running back. Yeah. The last minute move Bashal Tootin to the top. Really wanted.
See, I was interested to see how it was going to play that there, since it looked like our time had already expired. Then we're not worrying about the structure here. We're looking at players. This is a $3 fun draft. Bashal Tootin is massively undervalued. I want to keep that basically to myself, but anybody who listens to the show is going to hear it. Yeah, and he's the last guy, right? And so this is a 20-round draft as well, as opposed to an 18-round draft. There are lots of things you can do later at receiver. I mean, Michael Wilson versus Marvin Harrison. I mean, just pass on both of those guys at these prices. The Arizona Cardinals could be absolutely terrible this coming season. Not that that would be anything different than what they have been.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting to take Harrison necessarily. The Pearsall pick was at least a little bit intriguing to me. The decision to be running back heavy through this point, with you saying it's a 20-round draft, we probably want at least 5. I was thinking maybe getting to 5 wasn't necessary because I was thinking the 18-round draft thing, where if you take running backs 101 and then 212 and 301, you have 3 of the top 25 overall picks as running backs. You're probably in an 18-round draft. Even if you don't take your 4th one early, you're thinking whatever, hyper fragile, the old Mike Beers strategy, and you're probably only taking 4, and you're going to take a lot of receivers late. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of opportunity, I think, later with veteran receivers. That's the thing that I've always noticed with the early ADP is you have late round opportunities. And that's something I noticed because I wrote up the field tippers piece where I used targets per out run as sort of a foundational thing, but talk about the different profiles. There were some players that have really late ADPs at receiver that don't make a lot of sense. And I'm not saying, like, in the draft you showed me, you took Jerry Jeudy again. We obviously think Jerry Jeudy had a horrible season last year, but his ADP is like 160. Just behind him, Calvin Ridley's at 172. Calvin Ridley is not a guy I want to be drafting. He's still under contract. He's not massively old, and his per route stuff, he just didn't run a lot of routes. He got hurt, but his per route stuff was actually pretty okay for the second straight year. That offense was bad, and then he got hurt. I don't think he's like a great pick, and as soon as he starts to get more expensive, I won't want to take a lot of Calvin Ridley, but literally ADP 172 for a guy who is actually a target earner is just silly in the like a best ball setting. Anyway, we're almost back up. You've got some more guys in the queue there. Yeah, I don't know anything about the strategy of it all. I just at this point, you got some quarterbacks in there. Do we need to be thinking quarterback early? Does that dry up, or what are you thinking?
It can, but I don't know that it's I mean, the names here: Purdy, Stafford, Goff, Nix. Because we haven't drafted receivers, we don't necessarily know who we would want from that perspective. Again, we're not really emphasizing that. Went ahead and took Jordan Addison there, Michael Pittman, Xavier Worthy here, Ben. I mean, is it something where, I mean, you get these running backs early, and I know a lot of people are going to be rolling their eyes, but in best ball at these prices, Jordan Addison and Xavier Worthy at the 8-9.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly as skeptical as anyone about, well, the Addison stuff is just, we don't know what like a suspension might look like or those things. But the Vikings, I was saying to you, you got Hawkinson in your other draft at like tight end 25. And I was like, did he get hurt? Did I miss something? The Vikings' whole passing game is priced way down because of how bad JJ McCarthy was last year and the expectation that he's going to play most of the season again. And I guess that's just not the way I would think about it. The way I would think about it is to kind of give all these guys a pass. They all were held down by quarterback play last year. And then to think through, hey, this like 2026 is not 2025, right? There's a lot of uncertainty. The fact that JJ McCarthy played as much as he did, and we got some Carson Wentz in there, and we got some Max Brosmer in there, like they're going to address quarterback, in my opinion. They fired the GM. There was then all this talk about the GM being more in on McCarthy. I think Kevin O'Connell kind of won that power struggle and has already started the conversation in a direction where we, don't count on JJ McCarthy getting every chance all season. I mean, this team went 9-8 last year, despite just basement level QB play. QB play you described as on the level of Zach Wilson recently. I mean, you have to make quick decisions.
No, it was way worse than Zach Wilson.
Worse than
it was
Zach
much, much worse. If you put Tua or Derek Carr into this offense, they will scorch the earth. They're not necessarily going to win the Super Bowl or even the NFC North. They will gain a ton of yards and score touchdowns.
Which means that Jordan Addison at 8-12 is a ridiculous price if you understand the profile and you understand what he was dealing with from a quarterback perspective last year. You're basically thinking that 2026 can only be situationally improved, because if you do still buy in to the offense and KOC and all that stuff. So yeah, I do think Derek Carr is probably going to be the quarterback for this team next year. He basically has come right out and said that he wants to, and it's, read the tea leaves a little bit. It seems like the team is interested in that as well. And again, Hawkinson, Jefferson in the second round, Addison at 8-12. Worthy's an interesting one. Sean's still 22 years old right now, if I'm not mistaken. Or is it 23? Is he still 22? He's still 22 right now. He turns 23 at the end of April. This is a guy that's extremely young, extremely, extremely young, younger than many of the 2026 rookies, even though he's already played 2 seasons. And then also in week 1, he got his shoulder dislocated, separated, had, ligament issues, was wearing a brace. Then he had an ankle issue where that was clearly sapping his speed. His ADOT was much higher this past year. They didn't do as many of the manufactured touches because he had a shoulder issue where he couldn't take a ton of hits. And then he had a stretch in the season where his ankle was a problem. A lot of people just love to say, hey, this player sucks now, or just not now, that he sucks, that he was never good. We are dealing with a situation where he's been underwhelming. Like, there's a scale here. It's not like he was still okay relative to that. He was pretty bad, and I'll acknowledge that. But I'm not willing to write off Xavier Worthy at this point in his career. I think that is an absurd expectation. We're back up. You've moved some receivers to the top as Tyler Shuck and Sam Darnold went in the 3 picks before us. Do we need to take a QB here? You're still not worried about the quarterback position.
I mean, at this point, they hardly matter for us. We're drafting guys who aren't going to score a ton of points. I would like to go with Higgins and KC Concepcion. We're not going to really talk about the rookies, but Concepcion is one of the guys from the rookie guide where people are excited about him. He has a great chance of being a first-round pick, and yet there is obviously a big gap between where people are looking at him and names like Tate and Lemon. I guess I'm not sure that gap actually exists. So if you're able to get him here, it's a fun pick. Again, we'll have a lot more on that in the future, and check out the rookie. But Jaden Higgins here been a little bit like Luther Burden in that we got some intriguing, some individual play and some individual games, some catches, reasons to be enthusiastic, and yet we have questions about the overall talent of the Houston offense. We have concerns about how this coaching staff is looking at the offense. Higgins didn't run as many routes as we would like. But one of the things here, when you pass on Collins at the 2-3, I do like coming back and making this bet on Higgins in round 10. I don't think those guys are going to be the same. I don't think that it's something where the gap is clearly in favor of Higgins, but he's another name at this price that I think is a lot more exciting than the guys we were looking at in rounds like 2, 3, 4, 5 when we passed on the position.
Yeah, he's a fun one to have at a cost like this as well. I'm looking at it. The QB would have been Stroud. Who could have taken Higgins, Stroud, but the rookie receiver here, the QB now, it has to be Derek Carr. Right? We gotta buy into this plan that he's going to be the Vikings quarterback this year. Although we don't really care about the stacking and all that. We said we weren't going to do that. It's hard to turn it off when you're actually drafting. But we have Addison and could take Hawkinson in this draft as well late and have a potential Vikings Derek Carr stack. That seems like a really good value. Is Stroud's actually potentially going to come all the way back, although I think the Nico Collins drafter is going to be right here before us, and he's behind ADP because we passed on Collins at that 2-3 turn. But yeah, I like those wide receiver picks. Get a little rookie flair in there. What are you looking at here? Bryce Young, Kyler Murray go. Stroud still sitting there.
Stroud would be the preference, but trying to find Derek Carr for you over here in the...
He's not that low. I saw him. He's been going. Oh, Malik Willis goes. So 3 quarterbacks go, and none of them is Stroud, who we do have a stack partner for, and is at least a stable starter. People are really down on CJ Stroud tonight. I get it to a degree, but as far as drafting in February goes, this person timed out and they're going to get Stroud. Ooh, they did not. They got Devon Achane, had a Q set. So Stroud makes sense for the first pick pretty easily. You also have Cam Ward in there, another guy who's very likely to play the majority of the season. People have talked about how bad he was as a rookie. It was a tough situation. You have a new coach in there now. Stroud went. You want to take Travis Hunter here?
Yeah, let's go ahead and make that play, just in part so we can talk about it, in part because with the build that we have, that gives us another super high-end potential breakout receiver. Obviously, the reason the Travis Hunter is so inexpensive is because of what Parker Washington did at the end of the year, because they have put together a receiver depth chart that doesn't necessarily need Hunter, and as a result, they've said he's going to play more defense. We could be right back to that, whole conversation that seemed to eat up all of last offseason, where the idea was that Hunter was going to be a defensive back. At the same time, we're hearing things about Brian Thomas potentially being available. I think when you're looking at a team that has the running back firepower that we have and is so interesting in other ways, that making the Travis Hunter bet here, when the upside, especially the second half of the season upside, is gigantic, is kind of intriguing to me. Is that the case for you, or would you definitely gone in a different direction?
Honestly, I don't know. I'm open to it. I think the conversation about him playing a lot of cornerback is obviously not ideal, but in best ball, you're talking about splash weeks and those things. There could very easily be scenarios where he's running more routes, or individual games where he's running more routes. I do think that he's likely to play plenty of receiver going forward, even acknowledging the reality that he's probably headed toward a lot more cornerback snaps this year. And so I don't think it's a bad pick in the 13th round.
I mean, next names were Shaheed, a special teams guy, Judy, who played one of the worst seasons of all time last year, Downs, Booty, who's even like a borderline starter, Pat Bryant, interesting, but a lot of projection, Jalen McMillan, Brandon Ayuk, Troy Franklin. I mean, those guys all outscore Hunter, but the upside area for Hunter seems like it's in a completely different place than the rest of these receivers.
But even like Downs is somebody who I'm out on because of the move toward more tight ends and the way that offense direction went and everything. But like, there's talk that Pittman might get cut, and Josh Downs is a good player. But yeah, several of those names should not be going in that range. The names that you just mentioned, to me, like, they're not good enough football players to be expecting. Or I don't know. I said several. You changed the screen, so I don't even know who I'm referring to at this exact moment. But who we're on deck again. It's tough and we knew this was going to be the case. I forgot it was 20-second clocks on Underdog these days. Even when it was 30-second clocks, we always had a hard time getting through our conversations. Now it's 15 seconds. You just got on the clock and there was 15 seconds. It's
always a bit odd how it goes here. Did you want Calvin Ridley?
I don't care. I think he's a value. Yes. What are we at the end of 14? It's only, I mean, we're not even quite to his ADP, but it's fine. The pick for me instead of Hunter may have been Cam Ward to set up a Ridley pick. And since we didn't take Ward, like whatever, but I mean, I don't care. You have Penix up there. It seems like they don't even know if they believe in Penix. The Penix conversation is really interesting. So you threw Shamir DK at the top. I'm out on him. I'm out on him and A.O. Manor, I think. They both had really rough per route profiles, bolstered by just running a ton of routes, which is good. But I also think we need to contextualize, like, this was a team going into the year. We knew that these guys were going to run a lot of routes. They needed production. Ridley only ran 160 routes. And they were like not really capable of doing much. I just think like they're day 3 guys who were pushed into roles that you could talk about like development and improvement obviously coming forward, but like they were pushed into roles. They were game planned for more so than late round guys typically are. And they weren't very good. The way I wrote it, I'm pulling up my targets per route run right up, the field tippers right up. I wrote that you'd need improvement in a few different ways that quite frankly rarely all hits. And then I try to be early in moving on from guys where the incentive was there from the team to develop the player and the player just wasn't very good. That's sort of my takeaway on those guys. Maybe it's more on Ward. Maybe it's more on the dysfunctional situation. And they weren't like massively worse than Ridley, but it's not just that Ridley earned more volume. It's that I believe Ridley was more efficient as well, like per target, even though Ridley like can't catch. It's kind of bizarre, honestly, that his profile, like Ridley had a 1.89 yards per out run by PFF's numbers last year, and 8.7 yards per target is really pretty good. DK was 1.02, had a 5.8 yards per target, which is really pretty poor. Even with some design touches, some stuff around the line of scrimmage. Not saying that, he can't possibly be good, but it's another receiver. I when we get done with this and we get a chance to talk about it a little bit more, I'm going to ask you about the players you're into, because it seems like a lot of them, a lot of year two players so far, a lot of them are guys that didn't have necessarily a great first season. I want to go back to Travion Henderson and Bashal Tutin. I do buy into those ones quite a bit. There's a lot of people that are concerned, but the early cost is high as well. I think you and I talked about Travion the last time we recorded, that going at the 4-5 turn is expensive for sure. And you said that about Burden as well, that you don't think he should be going that high, but then also we selected those guys at those costs. So I think that's an interesting discussion about, it's hard to be like they should be going this high, but if we're still willing to take them, then that's the cost that we think they're worth, certainly. But yeah, we're almost back up. You're filling up the queue with some QBs and tight ends. We have 5 running backs, 8 receivers, 1 each on the QB and tight end front. What are you thinking?
Well, tight end is probably the position that we are. I mean, obviously tight end and quarterback are some other positions we're looking at here as needing to make some more selections. I think that Terrence Ferguson, as a second-year breakout guy, again, someone who was not very productive as a rookie, is interesting. Parkinson, obviously, the teammate there. You have Gunnar Helm with that position being opened up. We could go ahead and get Derek Carr to make sure we have him. Do you have preferences among these guys?
Ferguson's a pick I'm definitely interested in. And I think, getting Carr makes sense because we only have one QB and there's like no other quarterbacks. We're basically banking on Derek Carr being a starter this year in this build. Now it's a 2-quarterback build where we have Stroud and Carr, and you can at least get floor. But yeah, I mean, we sort of said we weren't really, it's a $3 draft. We weren't really taking it super seriously, but Carr's ADP is quite late, but could really go at any point at this time. Hawkinson did go a couple picks there before Ferguson. Couldn't add him to a potential Minnesota stack. Ferguson is interesting. They did try to use him some, even though they had a lot of tight end depth. They tried to use him in specific instances. There's been some early reporting that they may try to focus more sort of play calling and scheming and stuff in his direction. Like compared to the points I was just making about DK, where DK, the runway was open for him and for A.O. Manor. For Ferguson, the runway was very much blocked. It's blocked by good receivers and it's blocked by a lot of tight ends. And yet they were still finding situations to use him in his rookie season when they weren't really necessarily forced to. And then early in the offseason, they're like, we want to do even more with him next year. I think that's all very favorable for him.
Yeah, and I think that we can sometimes get too excited about guys who are efficient in a small sample, and we can push back on guys, or we can hammer guys like DK who, the runway was open for them, but it wasn't reasonable to ask them to do that much that early. And when they do some things that maybe you wouldn't even have expected from someone with that type of prospect profile, then it becomes a little bit intriguing, certainly if he's jumping past guys. But I like what you're saying about Ferguson. And one of the things for me is that, his profile coming in was exciting, and there is potential stardom there. And the potential stardom matters, right? And so when we're looking at that portion of it, I get pretty excited in the Rams offense with Matthew Stafford, with the efficiency that you sometimes get from it. I mean, we talk a lot about the Joker thing with Sean Payton and the Broncos. You can look at it through that lens for other teams as well. And Ferguson has the potential to be that in year 2. And certainly the price that you get after the relative lack of overall production as a rookie, it's really easy to go ahead and make that bet.
Yeah. At his cost, I mean, it's all cost adjusted. And for example, DK, very cheap. I think it's fine to be taking him where we took him. My position on him is more like, there's a lot of late round flyers you can take. And so it's like, do you even want exposure to him at all? Or are you comfortable not having any exposure? We are back up. You have Ty Simpson at the top of the queue. I don't have a strong lean here at all. I don't even know anything about Ty Simpson really. Is he likely to start? We took him. You got some tight ends in there. I'm comfortable with either of those tight ends, which was Chigakonkwo and Pat Freiermuth. Evan Ingram is there. We take Okonkwo. Really buying into that Tennessee passing game with both Ridley and DK, and now Okonkwo.
Okonkwo to me is probably the most exciting of the free agent tight ends from the perspective of what it could mean to get with a team that can unlock him, as opposed to having to be on the Tennessee Titans, where it's just like, I mean, this is, a dumpster fire inside a train wreck. And
I didn't even realize he was a free agent, but that sounds great.
So, I mean, again, at pick 217 and wanting to get a third interesting tight end when the first two guys are Fannin and Ferguson, I like the way that tight end room shapes up now overall.
He, 3 straight seasons for Okonkwo, between 380 and 420 routes, between a 17.5% and 18.5% targets per route, which is not good, but for a tight end, it's not terrible. And between a 7.0 and 7.5 yards per target, which again is not good, but is not terrible for a tight end. We're talking about bad offenses. It's put in between 1.25, 1.35 yards per out run each year, which is, again, not good. But there are tight ends who, if they run enough routes, have good seasons when they're like at 1.5 yards per out, which is not far off of what Okonkwo's been able to do in a bad offense where the efficiency's been tough. Like, for example, Dalton Schultz has been a route eater that run, like his career highs are like 1.5 yards per out run seasons. And he's like a viable late round tight end some of these seasons. I didn't realize he was a free agent. It makes sense that he would be gone. Gunnar Helm looked interesting as a rookie and probably is an interesting pick. I don't know. Does he go before that? Is he available? Like, he's probably an interesting late round tight end as well.
Yeah, he was one of the other names that I mentioned when we took Ferguson, and he went in the next. So that was the 16-17, and then he went at 1802. So he did not come back to the next turn for us there. And I agree with you. He's an interesting selection also.
Yeah, he had a fun little rookie year. His yards per out run, his targets per out run, all a little bit better than Okonkwo's in the same offense. 22% targets per out, 1.45 yards per route. And he made some really good plays. Again, the kind of thing where you were talking about with DK, like if you see some things, I mean, he made some nice plays on the sideline. Remember, he had a really good one-handed catch at one point. Showed some ball skills. He was one of the guys that if you were watching all the games this year, you're like, yeah, Gunnar Helm's probably a player. Maybe not like the best in the league or anything, but certainly interesting. That's why I would expect Okonkwo, if he is a free agent, to be gone. I didn't realize that, but that is a lot more exciting for Helm to me. But to your point, yeah, if Okonkwo lands in a good spot with his athleticism and stuff, he could be interesting too. One thing Tennessee had going for it last year, a couple good tight ends. We're back up. You're throwing some young guys in the queue. Quinn Ewers is in the queue right now. I would like to personally remove him from the queue. Anything else you want to do is fine. So Keandre Lambert Smith there. Jalen Noel is one of the top available receivers. Are you not into him?
I mean, he could be interesting there. I don't necessarily love taking the bet on him on the same team as Higgins. But yeah, I mean, you want these guys to take a step. The situation with the Chargers, I think, is fascinating. And Ben, obviously the one pick that we would have made just with a little more time, with a little more preparation, what have you, is in the 15th round. We would have selected Trey Harris, but since you don't take him there, we go ahead and take Lambert Smith at the end. It'll be interesting to see exactly who's on the roster next season, what the depth chart is, and then where the points of emphasis are for Mike McDaniel in this offense. I think we both agree that the Chargers are a lot of fun. I think that they're probably the second best team in football when we project ahead. Certainly they weren't this last year. And you have interesting pricing here. I know this is one of the things that you had been interested to talk about. So as we
Who's the best team in football if they're the second best team?
I think it's probably got to be the Seahawks. But certainly if you're looking at two teams that are maybe similar and one of them has Justin Herbert and one of them has Sam Darnold, maybe you just go for the glory and be like, the Chargers are the best team in football. Right?
We talked about this around the concept of the Omni Fantasy stuff that I do, and I took the Chargers in one of my early drafts, and we were in agreement on that. And then I just took the Seahawks in my other draft. Our buddy JJ Zachariason, doing a draft with him, he took the Rams ahead of the Seahawks. I took the Seahawks after that. Everyone in this league was waiting because it's a bunch of football analysts, and I think everybody understands it's a draft format. You draft teams from different leagues. Everyone understands that like you can pick good NFL teams later. But I agree with you. I felt like I think I took the Seahawks in like the 12th round. Half the people listening don't know what the heck I'm talking about as it refers to this on fantasy thing. But the point is it's wide open, but I do agree with you on like looking ahead, you have to feel pretty good about the Seahawks. I thought you may have gone a different direction with that, so I was interested. Anyway.
So we look at this Chargers team, and we have Hampton go in this draft at 112. I believe his ADP is about 15. We have Ladd McConkey go at 311. I think that's a little bit after his ADP. Then we come back through and you see the really controversial one being Quentin Johnston going in the middle of 8. You have at the QB position Justin Herbert going at 702. And to give a little bit of context, in this particular draft, that means he goes right after Jalen Hurts and Caleb Williams and before the late 7, early 8 guys of Dart, Lawrence, Mahomes, and Prescott. That's very enthusiastic about Herbert, given some of the preferences that the head coach will still probably have. This is one where you have this efficiency volume balance that has always kind of existed for the pass first QBs, where when you eviscerate opponents, then you don't get as many attempts. You look at some of those peak seasons from Peyton Manning, and it's shocking how few attempts he actually had. But certainly there's a lot of confidence in him. So he goes there. You have Johnston in 8. And then you come back with some of these other names in the offense of Gadsden going at the 8-11. When we took Addison and Worthy there at the 8-9, I was going to make a pitch to take Gadsden and one of those two receivers if he had made it one more pick. And then you have Trey Harris at 1502. And obviously, mostly for fun, we take KLS in the last selection there. Are folks overconfident in how this offense and how the looks are going to be distributed? Or is this already a pretty crazy price on McConkey, knowing what he has done as a rookie and now thinking, he's going to get an elite coordinator?
The McConkey thing is interesting. I posted about, and I wrote about in my targets per out run piece, Quentin Johnston being the one that I think is pretty clearly overpriced. And I posted about it on Twitter/X, and people were mad about that because people really get mad when you say anything other than what is already fully accepted. So the idea that Quentin Johnston is multiple rounds overpriced in the 8th made people angry.
Then we've got to change, since you are on social media, we've got to change your perspective from people being mad to this was a great job of engagement farming. I've got to do.
Yeah, engagement farming. That's right. A lot of people told me a lot of stuff about McConkey as if that downplayed the Johnston thing, that McConkey also did nothing in the second half of the year. Some notes on Johnston include, so the first 4 weeks of the year, he had over 70 yards per game and scored 4 touchdowns. He had a 2 touchdown game and scored in 2 of the other 3 games. 4 TDs in 4 games, over 70 yards in all 4. I think his high was like 110 or something. I don't have it in front of me. But from week 5 on, the rest of the year, he went over 53 yards twice. He had, and I understand, best ball's boom bust. He had 30 or fewer yards in 6 of the final 11 games. He basically was back to being this guy that last year was a 15th round pick. He finished with the same stat line this year as he did last year. He just started that first month really hot, and everyone was like, oh my God, why was he a 15th round pick? And then was so bad the rest of the year that he literally matched the line. Like his 2 years are the raw numbers are almost identical. It's like 800 yards and 9 touchdowns or something, which is good. It's fine. And if you get that at this price, that's fine. The issue is you're now 3 years into a career for a guy that really hasn't done a lot. It's actually about 700 yards and 8 touchdowns. I just pulled it up. He went 55, 7, 11, and 8 in 2024 and was a 15th round pick. And then he went 51, 7, 35, and 8, essentially the exact same line. And now he's going in the 8th round. Again, it's purely, in my opinion, it's this primacy effect that we talk about where people latch on to that, like the first month and those things. And then again, most of the responses that I got were just, this offense was broken. They didn't have any way of protecting Herbert. All those things are true. Quentin Johnston's routes were also falling as the season went along.
If those things are true, wouldn't you be all in on Trey Harris?
That's the thing. What
wouldn't you be all in on Oronde Gadsden?
Yeah, I to me, it doesn't mean that Quentin Johnston is any better than he is. And the reason that I understand McConkey, I don't necessarily like McConkey at 311 as he goes in this draft. I wouldn't draft him there. So when I say I wouldn't necessarily like it, what I actually mean is that's overpriced to me too. And I wasn't commenting on McConkey, even though I got a massive amount of response around McConkey. But my perspective on McConkey would be there's at least the season before. Like I don't understand why everyone's like, all we can look at is 2025, and we got to create splits in 2025 as well. So I got these responses that were like, look at how bad the passing game was in the second half of 2025. Like part of the reason the passing game was bad in the second half of 2025 is the wide receiver play as well, which is true about McConkey and Quentin Johnston. But the fact that Quentin Johnston was losing routes and was not performing is not something that I'm going to just write off when his 2024 was actually not that great, mostly touchdown dependent, about 700 yards. His 2023 was a bad rookie season. His prospect profile was very hit or miss. There was reasons that we really liked it. Most of them were around some of the explosiveness that he saw and then the physical stuff, if that could translate. Well, we now have 3 years where this is a pretty hit or miss player. Now, as you look at some of the advanced stuff, I've always made fun of the guy for being really bad at contested catches when he's a size speed freak. He's a massive dude, huge catch radius, and somehow had the worst contested catch rate in the entire NFL in 2024, which is not a sticky stat and not something that I was trying to say like he can never do or anything, but he shouldn't be dead last when he's as physical as he is. He was much better in 2025. He was able to make some contested plays, but still below average or like right around average. I can't remember the exact number when I looked that up. His yards per out run was actually down from 2024. There was like a little bit more efficiency in some ways when you look at his overall profile. But like at this point, you're talking about a guy who's gotten a lot of routes through 3 years because he was a first round pick and has not differentiated enough. And it's a long viewpoint. It's the only thing that is really good here is the first 4 games of last year and some sporadic touchdown. And yes, like we know size, speed, and that stuff correlates with touchdowns, but I don't understand in the 8th round how you're going to get significant hit potential there. You're hoping that he returns 8th round value. Like that's probably what he was last year with 700 yards and 8 TDs. He had enough spikes. He had enough touchdowns. But the real risk here is he just loses all these routes. Trey Harris is running these routes, as you mentioned, or Keandre Lambert-Smith or whatever, which already started to happen this past year. Johnston also not really relied upon much in their one playoff game. And again, you can blame all that on the offensive line and those things, but I don't know. I have a really hard time with the Quentin Johnston price. And like you said, I would be way more interested in Harris at that price. And if I was going to pay up for a premium, my point on McConkey, a little bit of a longer viewpoint is like, I don't think his prospect profile was necessarily even as good as Quentin Johnston's, but the rookie season is relevant. The fact that in 2024 he had a great season that Quentin Johnston has not done at the NFL level, that's the other thing that's so weird to me about the responses people give you is like, did you only watch football in 2025? Do you not know that there's other seasons that we've seen from these young players? Like McConkey has 2 seasons, Quentin Johnston has 3. The body of work matters, does it not?
It does. And I want to say I really liked Quentin Johnston's prospect profile. And so, even though we didn't have a lot of him last year, I was enthusiastic about or excited for him in that first month where he looked good. But the same problems are still there, as you mentioned. I mean, SIS has him at an 85% on target catch rate, which is just not good, right? And 10% drops, that's not good. He's got that problem. And so a lot of it is that he's got these skills that most receivers don't have. So can you unlock those? Can you scheme around it? For me, the answer to this question of why couldn't you pick Johnston there has to center back on the coordinator. And you basically can't make any argument from last season because we now have the 3 years in a row, as you mentioned, where there's just nothing about it that says a pick in the first 10 rounds. You've got to make the case that McDaniel can unlock him in a Jonnu Smith type of way, right? And so when we're looking at these guys who have the wide range of outcomes, like who is going to be the player who ends up doing Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle types of things? Do they have that guy on the roster? Because when you look at McConkey, it probably is a little bit more possession receiver than people want. I mean, one of the things that was interesting last year, for example, when you consider that a big part of what Johnston does well is underneath catch and run, is that his ADOT and his target depth actually on receptions, right? Passes that were actually completed. Both of those were about 3 yards, not quite 3 yards ahead of McConkey. And so then there's this question of, well, what will they do going forward? Because if McConkey is underneath, again, we have questions like who is going to be the player who has some vertical aspect to them in 2026? Can it be Trey Harris? Can it be Keandre Lambert-Smith? KLS didn't have, hardly any volume at all. His is pretty funny where his overall ADOT was 16. His target depth on completed passes was just 6 yards, which gives you a little bit of a feel of how successful they were on some of those aggressive throws. The person that seems like we probably can count on the offense, maybe not turning into a Jonnu Smith, but at least utilizing, is Gadsden. You think about someone who was a really good prospect, drops in the draft because of tweener concerns, which I think those are valid, but then you come out and you do what he did. I mean, SIS has him leading the team in yards per route, and we know he had some blow-up games. His looks very straightforward in contrast to the rest of the guys, where you probably can't win big with McConkey or Johnston, but you could lose. Maybe you could win big with Harris, but you have the chance for that to be a 0. Gadsden seems like the way to play this that is a high floor and also a high ceiling.
Yeah, and to be clear, I got a lot of responses about McDaniel too. I went on my whole little spiel there and whatever. I mean, there's some of the responses I got were very straightforwardly like the market's not overvaluing Quentin Johnston's first month. They're overvaluing, or they're properly valuing whatever the OC change. And I do see that upside in those things that you were talking about. I do see it as more of an optimistic point for Gadsden as well. I wrote that too. You mentioned Jonnu Smith. The comparison I made in my target spot run piece, my field tippers piece, was Darren Waller, which I didn't think he was really going to be anything. But from pretty much the moment he was able to get on the field, like they were almost going to cut him because McDaniel was like, I mean, we don't know if this guy's going to actually be on the field. He can't get healthy. Finally gets healthy and gets activated. From pretty much the first game, they're dialing stuff up for him it wasn't the short stuff like they did with Jonnu. It was downfield routes, but they're getting him into space over the middle of the field. He had, I think, 2 touchdowns in his first game, or at least one right away, or it had like a long catch and a touchdown, maybe like a 4 for 45 and a TD line or something. I can't remember, but they were able to get him into some space, and he gets hurt again. And then as soon as he's healthy to go again, it was like Darren Waller's getting targets again. And for Gadsden, as far as what like a lot of people have pointed out he's not maybe a full every down tight end. Maybe he isn't as great of a blocker as some of these other tight ends and some of the stuff. For Gadsden, the prospect of Darren Waller as sort of that like nice upside comp is something that I think is really interesting. And the ways that McDaniel was able to use him, even as he was a limited player last year, Waller, in terms of health and ability to get on the field, and also in terms of age and those things, I think was really, really interesting and very bullish for Gadsden going forward. The Johnston stuff, like I'm not saying Johnston can't have production. I don't understand where in the 3 years of body of work, like I was just looking through the comments. I found this post that I had in some of the comments, and a lot of them were like, yeah, we just really want to stack this offense. I don't know. To me, that's not how best ball works. It's like you just say, oh, I really want to stack this offense, and then you pay whatever the prices the market is giving you are. You still have to figure out the smart way to stack the offense. If I was stacking this offense right now, I mean, I would definitely want, obviously you want to try to get Herbert in there, but I would want to try to get Amari and Hampton in the first round if that's possible, because I think he's probably one of the biggest keys. McConkey, to me, even at his price, if I was like going out of my way to stack the Chargers, makes more sense than Johnston at his. But like you said, Gadsden would be the one that really makes sense. And then Trey Harris. Like you don't have to stack all the players that the market is telling you. You can pick and choose which guys. And like you just do KLS on the end of our draft here and said, hey, we want to have some exposure to this Chargers offense. We'll do it through Keandre Lambert-Smith. Maybe there's some injuries. Maybe there's some other things that happen. But, I mean, opportunity cost is a thing. Like, you can't just draft all the players at all their costs and say, oh, I was stacking the offense. That means it's smart. Like, that's not – I don't know. We're not doing a whole thing on best ball strategy, but that's not the way that I believe the ways that best ball strategy has evolved are very interesting to me. And people are just like, yeah, you can never be wrong if you stack, or you can never be wrong if you do certain things, because these are the truisms. And it's always cost adjusted. There's always a cost component to everything in fantasy football. That's, I guess, the point that I'm trying to drive home there. There's literally no strategy that you could possibly do that you could just, oh, well, because I'm doing that strategy, I can draft any player at any cost. That doesn't make any sense. Sorry.
Draft all the players, Ben. Come on.
Just draft all the players. What are some other teams that are interesting?
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you if you had specific guys that, as we went through, jumped out to you as being overvalued, or if you wanted to look at our team and not from a structural perspective, but from a player perspective, who did you like for us in terms of the price that we got them at and where you think they should be going overall?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's good. We picked on the turn, so we really only have, a few options. Can you click the blow up? And for people who are watching this, I thought that was going to make it bigger, but it made it go away. That's exactly the button I wanted you to click, but it made there's the draft board. What if we went through round by round and kind of said our favorite pick and least favorite pick for each round and took turns? Okay. For me in the first round, the favorite pick, first round, there's a lot of really good picks. I like the JSN price at 5. I think that's sort of an end of a tier, although I like Jonathan Taylor at 6. I'm going to say Hampton at 12. And then my least favorite pick would probably be Genty at 11. Genty had a tough first year. Their team is not good. They got a new coach. I don't think we're certain that Clint Kubiak's great. And then there's just a comment today at the Combine, which may affect his price going forward, that he does want to use a secondary back as well. And so you don't even get the full workload element potentially that he got this past year. I have a hard time with Genty sticking right at his ADP from last year when he had a really tough first season.
Yeah, that's tough because I really want him to be the play. I want Kubiak to unlock him. I think they will get much better quarterback play, obviously, with the number 1 pick. I think that you're going to have viable coordinating there. I think that Genty will be actually gotten into space. I mean, you can't just say it. You have to be able to do it. I think Kubiak will be able to do that for him. I think he'll be one of the top receiving backs in the NFL. You're not going to find a situation that is similar to the Seahawks where you have someone like a Kenneth Walker who always comes out near the top of the NFL in peripherals, but does some things that are going to infuriate coaches where you run side to side and then have kind of the most extreme contrast to that in a player who is good without being great, but a Charbonnet, right? You have to have that in order to siphon off enough touches for it to be a huge problem. Otherwise, you're kind of dealing with the Bijan and Tyler Algier or the Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, which still allows them to score in a way that gets them to the top of the draft board. Now their teams, more viable, obviously, than the Raiders, although the Falcons have been problematic there. So I think that what you're saying makes sense. I'm hoping that he does well. I think that Achane is probably the trickiest first-round pick when you look at just how bad the team is going to be. The Dolphins will probably be the worst team in football next year. You mentioned not wanting Quinn Ewers in the queue, like in the 20th round. The Dolphins are talking about how much they like him as a quarterback. Achane to me is basically Jahmyr Gibbs, and maybe with even a little bit more intuitiveness in terms of being able to get into the hole and make the big gains. But he is just going to be in a catastrophic situation unless they move him, in which case, I mean, if you're any of these teams that doesn't have a running back, you're like, well, could the Chiefs trade for him? Who else needs a running back?
They're not going to
back to the Chiefs.
They're not going to move Achane though. I mean, he's on a rookie deal.
You've got a running back, and you have a terrible team.
Yeah,
like they've got to be in the. I mean, one of the reasons the Jets were so awful this season is because they moved so much talent to try and build for the future, and you always run the risk that as you do that, you're so bad that everyone who's part of that process gets fired. I mean, even if you're early on in it, right? And we've seen some coaches last very little time because the team was apocalyptically bad, even though that was the plan. I mean, the owner can be like, okay, well, this is the plan. And you sell him on it and you're like, okay, we're rebuilding. And then you put a minor league football team out there and the fans are like, what are you doing? It's like, yeah, it was bad. We got to get somebody else. And the Dolphins are a year behind the Jets. I mean, that's how, if not multiple years, they're going to be awful.
They always take these players down with them. I mean, it's like Bane in that Batman movie. Like they expect one of us in the wreckage. Like they're always like, they could get a little bit of value out of Achane, but they're not going to get a first round pick or anything in a trade. And if they trade him to somewhere like the Chiefs and he goes off and has like a great season, they know that the casuals are all going to be mad at them for trading Devon Achane because they're going to overstate the the situational element. So I mean, Achane has a great year last year, even on a bad offense. I think what people who are excited about him and taking him here are misunderstanding, and you're obviously alluding to, and I think you're right, he's the worst pick in the first round, is the Mike McDaniel effect. The fact that he was able to create a positive run game. That's been Mike McDaniel dating back to the San Francisco years and the entire Shanahan scheme and all these things. Bobby Slowick, I believe, is taking over now. You're not going to get that. You're not going to get, hey, Devon Achane is going to get creases to be able to then elevate his talent. He's going to have to create on his own. It's what Genti just had to deal with last year. Maybe the situation for Genti does improve with Clint Kubiak on those things. I agree with you. We can be optimistic about Genti to a degree. The Achane thing, unless he gets traded, like you said, it's crazy to be taking him at 110, hoping that some team's going to trade him, that they're going to trade him when Breece Hall couldn't even fetch a third round. Like, what are they going to get out of him? A third rounder at best? Like, they're not going to do
probably more than that, but still it is problematic. And that would be, I think, the point for me here is that, I mean, Breece Hall was tough for us at 301. I do think that Achane has been so ridiculously good that he's a better reality player than Breece Hall, but I mean, not by some massive gap. I mean, Breece Hall is astonishingly good. And I mean, if you're having a hard time taking him at 301, now I like him because I think it's actually a nice sort of arbitrage type of play off of these other guys who are also in bad situations.
Where should Achane go?
But I don't think you can have Hall at 301 and Achane at 110 when now Achane is actually the player in the worst situation.
Worst situation. So he's a third rounder? I mean, that's what I was going to say. Like, if I ask you where should he go, where would you put him?
I'm going to still put him, late 2 because he's so dynamic. And there's always a possibility that Miami build something out that's okay. One of the things last year is it was guaranteed with what they had from a coordinator perspective, what they had with his backups and what they had with Justin Fields. It was guaranteed that Breece Hall was going to underperform ADP. I mean, it's guaranteed for Achane too at this price, but the environment could end up being okay, where last year there was no way it was going to end up being okay for Breece Hall.
Totally. Who's your favorite pick in the first round?
I'm going to go ahead and say Jamar Chase at 4, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a good one.
Gap everybody again, and is going to be the easy 101 the following year.
Yeah, that 4, I was thinking about him too. That 4, and I said JSN Taylor 5-6 range. I think that range is nice because there's like you're getting players that could arguably go 1. I don't know that Taylor necessarily fits that, but I mean, even McCaffrey at 8 arguably could fit that. I think when you start to get towards the later part of the first round, there's a pretty big drop off at some point, a tier break at some point. The second round, I'm going to say Justin Jefferson at 201. And you asked a good question about who should he be going ahead of. I mentioned it. I said Genty or Achane at the time. I think probably should be going ahead of those guys. I don't necessarily think you can push him that much higher, but I do think it's just a reflection of him being underpriced. Like it's sort of similar to this point about the 104, 105, 106 range where you have really talented players, but there's good players ahead of them, but you like to be towards the end of a tier, if you will. I probably think that Jefferson should be going ahead of Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's going at 107. I mean, he's still Justin Jefferson, and I do think the quarterback situation is going to be addressed. I obviously gave that take earlier. The fact that you can get him in the second round to me, and I think he's going to be Justin Jefferson again. I don't think he's a lesser player. This is the guy that we've actually discussed as the clear best wide receiver in the league for many years. Going into last year, the conversation was, man, is JJ McCarthy good enough to keep him afloat, or is he going to tank him? And he clearly did, but now we're coming off the season where he was tanked. I think there's this element to Jefferson. The numbers are really important. When you hear his quotes and stuff, there's this element where like they're going to lose Justin Jefferson if they don't get him a 1,500-yard season this year. He wants to be the greatest statistical receiver of all time. He's talked about these things. He's going to have a bounce back statistical season, barring his own health. They're not going to put that bad a quarterback play out there again for Justin Jefferson's benefit. Like, you lose your player. At least that's my read on the situation. So I really like Neighbors at 204. There's a few other guys later in the round. I think I know which guy you'll take. But I'm going to say Jefferson, even at 201, is the guy in this draft that I think is the clear best one. The worst one in this range, man, it could very easily be one of these backs. I like both the tight ends, but I'm going to say Pickens. I mean, I don't hate it, but they're going to franchise tag him. He's going to be a number 2 again. He certainly benefited from Lamb missing time. I was saying last year when he was a 5th round pick that he should be going in the same spot as T. Higgins, or there shouldn't be a gap there. I think I ranked him ahead of Higgins in my actual rankings. Higgins was going in this range. I don't think it's wrong to have the second receiver in this range for this type of an offense. At the same time, Pickens isn't enough of an enigmatic player. There's some additional risk there. And I think the situation in 2025 was sort of as good as it could be. And now in 2026, I think you're paying up for that. Him and Higgins basically flipped ADPs. I see Higgins is in the 4th now, or Higgins a little higher than where Pickens was going last year. But I don't think now you just want to take Higgins at that cost and kind of lay off Pickens probably in the 2nd. Although I don't mind taking Pickens in the 3rd. I think the 2nd round's tough to pick which guy I dislike. What do you think?
That's interesting because I was going to say I think that the 2nd round is pretty underwhelming if we're looking at it from the perspective of last year. We really liked these guys going into that 15, 16, 17 range. Now, it's a similar thing, I think, this year, where for me, Trey McBride there is a pretty huge tier break. You have Drake London, who did some of the things we talked about from a volume perspective, but now doesn't have a quarterback. You've got a new system. You've got all of those problems. He's not as dynamic a player as this price indicates. You have Barkley and Chase Brown and Derrick Henry, Bucky Irving, all of whom disappointed last year and are pushed up in part because there still are reasons to gap them over the round 3 running backs, and you kind of need a running back, in part because you have the tier break at receiver as well. I'm sure that there are a lot of people who would like us to pick just a completely different and unique type of guy, and obviously there's the understanding of where tight end fits specifically in this format. But when you're talking about Brock Bowers at this price in an offense that suddenly has the guy who was a part of, not necessarily the catalyst for or any of those types of things, but was part of what JSN just did last year. I mean, you could easily see Bowers and JSN flipping for the next season. I think he's easily the best pick. And I'm going to go with Saquon Barkley as the worst pick.
I was wondering if you might go Barkley, and I knew you'd go Bowers, so I just left that one for you. When Jefferson goes for 1,800 yards this year, you're going to have to admit that he was the best second-round pick because the ceiling is just that high.
What if Bowers goes for 1,800 yards?
Right. If Bowers goes for 1,800 yards, then we're going to have to readdress. I agree with you that Bowers at 209, clear opportunity there. Third round, I'm looking at it, and man, I like a lot of the picks in the third round. I like A.J. Brown at 305. I mentioned that. Again, maybe I'm doing a little bit too much of the Justin Jefferson thing here as well, where I'm saying, okay, he's kind of coming off on a career year, and the numbers and the stuff that we saw him talk about, like, again, this is a player who clearly wants to be a great receiver and clearly is statistically, again, up until this past year, 6 straight years of 2.5 plus yards per route run. You only get there. And then this year, I think he was still at 2. I think he was above 2.0, but he wasn't. He broke that streak finally. And you could say maybe he's falling off. 28 years old, turns 29 in June, at the end of June. Still had a 1,000-yard season in only 15 games in a horrible situation with the Eagles. To me, I don't think he's clearly over the hill, and I do think the situation has to improve. It's either going to improve in Philly or it's going to be a trade, which is what it seems like is actually going to happen. Even though it's a lot of dead money and all these things people are talking about, it does seem like he may force his way out of there. And if he does, I think he's still incredibly talented. And I think we're going to be talking about a guy who still has, a couple of great seasons left in him. So it's like it's not that much cheaper than the second round price that I didn't want to pay last year. And yet last year, going into the situation, I had a lot of concerns. This year, I see upside scenarios where the situation actually gets very favorable for him. May even end up being one of the most favorable situations he's ever had, if not the most favorable situation he's ever had in his career, if he gets traded to the right spot or where that goes. But I'm not actually going to take him. I said I was going to take him. Man, there's a couple other ones, though. I mean, Kenneth Walker, I think, is really interesting in the later third here in our draft. I'm going to take actually, I'll just take Brown. I was looking at Tedoroa McMillan and Rashee Rice at the end of the third round as well. I like both of those guys too, but I think I'm going to say that Brown is the top pick here at 305. Again, it's weird because we're coming off a down year and it could be a downward trajectory to his career and those things. I guess I believe the market overreacts to the individual seasons at this point in the fantasy football timeline instead of considering the longer view stuff. And the fact that, like, going into last year, I had a ton of faith in A.J. Brown's longer view skill, and yet I knew that a situation was not going to be great for 2025. There was some optimism they might throw more. That didn't happen. But, like, the fact that he was so disgruntled all year, some people are going to see that as a negative. I think that the cost now goes down because of that, and I get a little bit of a discount on a player that I think is still one of the very best wide receivers of this generation, whose situation could improve between now and week 1. You're going to tell me he's got a piano on his back and he's your worst pick in round 3. Oh, I didn't say a worst pick. My worst pick, man, it might be McConkey at 311. I'm going to say Josh Jacobs at 302. I mean, do we even know that he's definitely going to be back with the Packers? They run the ball a ton. I can't, man. I can't keep doing the full accumulator thing. Like, yeah, he's going to get a lot of touches, but he's had a lot of touches the last several seasons. He's now 28 years old. He can be fine, but we don't really, I mean, I don't believe that he can be good enough to like define fantasy leagues at 302. It's a tough pick.
think that those make a lot of sense. I'm going to go ahead and throw my worst pick in first. I think it's Kyren Williams. He essentially is a committee back going in round 3. I know he scored well last season, but that's one of the things where I think you have to look beyond the specifics of a certain year and realize that the context now overall is very negative. And he would need to continue to play at probably a higher level than he is capable of in order to have the type of moat and the type of upside that you really need to burn a pick on a player in round 3. It's not that if he stays healthy, he won't score, but this is not a good price adjusted situation for him when you look at a variety of things. I mean, Blake Corum, not a huge star in his own right, but he did have a better evasion rate last year than Williams. He averaged more yards per carry. Both of those guys are probably going to be pushed by other players on their team. You think about Blake Corum, what he was able to do in year 2, probably the most talented back on this roster is now going to make a push in year 2. Maybe you end up having 3 guys there. Maybe it's still the 2 players, but that requires them staying healthy and just maintaining, again, the already limited moats that they had. It's a tricky situation, even though I like Kyren Williams. You like the offense, and he played well last season. Not a good price. I wanted to ask
another great call there. I just want to rubber stamp that because this is the market has always struggled to push Kyren higher than this because of his own profile, because it isn't an elite profile. The athleticism is non-elite and those things. Like, this is about as expensive as Kyren's ever been. Like, he got maybe into the higher third at times. Maybe he was a second round pick at some times. To be paying $307 for Kyren now, coming off of what Blake Corum just did and everything, and how they used them in the playoffs, where they were basically using them interchangeably, as you said, is really surprising. That's a great point.
It's tricky. I want to ask you about your field tippers piece. Obviously, you were saying that maybe your other favorite guy would be McMillan. He is going to be my pick for round 3. He had a fantastic rookie year, won some awards. He was clearly the guy there with the Panthers. His peripherals are interesting in that they're fine, but there isn't an area that jumps out and you're like, oh, he showed that he's a superstar in this area. So my theory is that if you have the prospect profile that McMillan had, which some people still disagree with a little bit or have some concerns over, but then you have the rookie season that he just had, and you don't really have teammate concern. There's not a challenge from teammates like we just talked about, with Kyren Williams and the running situation there. McMillan is the type of guy who should be a 1-2 turn pick, except for the fact that you have Bryce Young.
Exactly.
And so what should we do with someone who would be a 1-2 turn pick, but you're with the Panthers, you're with Young?
Yeah, I know he's a great pick, and I haven't written the NFC side of the field tippers one yet. I was going to get that done this week after my vacation. Again, I mentioned at the top, I've been a little bit sick. I just pulled up the kind of the per route stuff, and I mean, it's really exciting. My read on McMillan is entirely that the situation was poor. I thrilled to see that the voters voted him the rookie of the year this year, because I thought he was fantastic relative to his situation. I don't think Bryce Young's a good NFL quarterback. I do think Dave Canales did a lot to make it seem that way, and to get wins out of that and play things in a way that this is similar to a couple years back when we were criticizing Arthur Smith and people there was this back and forth with some listeners and some readers of Stealing Signals that were like, well, Arthur Smith's overachieving. His team is expected to be like a 4-win, 5-win team, and he's getting close to 500. And basically our argument on the show and my argument in Stealing Signals would often be that this is not a team that can compete for a title. You're basically hoping to sneak into the playoffs with a bad schedule, which is what the Panthers just did. And then they opened the season this year looking ahead to next year as one of the lowest futures odds to win next year's Super Bowl of any team. And not just any team that made the playoffs, of any team, period. Like, they're expected to be one of the very worst teams in the NFL next year. Yes, they end up winning their division. Yes, they go to the postseason. They're in the worst division in football. And the Arthur Smith corollary being that these coaches in both situations ran the ball way more than they should to limit possessions. We always talk about football as a game of possessions. It's very similar to that old college basketball thing. March Madness is coming up, where if you want to pick upsets, you want to look at teams that play slow and shoot a lot of threes and ratchet up the variance, limit the number of possessions and the opportunities for the better team to prove that they're better over more possessions. Shawn, this always calls to mind a few years back when we were driving home this point, when the Chiefs were at one of their pinnacles in the regular season. They went into Green Bay, the younger Green Bay team. I think it was Jordan Love's first season, and Green Bay just let Isaiah Pacheco run for like 100+ yards by playing a specific type of defense. And also they ran the ball a ton and limited, I think, both teams to 7 possessions, and both teams scored on a really high rate of possessions. But if you match them score for score in a game with very limited possessions, again, this is a Packers team that wasn't as good as we think of the Packers maybe now, or some people do. But they were able to win. They were able to win in Lambeau. I think they were like 7-point underdogs. They were able to beat the Chiefs by doing this strategy, by limiting the number of possessions, by doing those things. It's something we talked about with the Tyler Shuck data from 9 starts. I pointed out, man, these guys ran a ton, despite the fact that they were losing most of these games. The Panthers were able to pull out some wins, and most of their wins, if you go look at their point differential, it's like negative massive amount. Most of their wins were by a field goal. They're like 16-13 and stuff. I mean, this is the way that Canales had to coach this team, was really to hide Bryce Young and then to use him off play action and those things in key spots, ratchet up the variance, try to hit one big play down the field. And they were able to hit those on key downs and key spots and win some games. You're not going to build a franchise around that. You're not going to win a Super Bowl that way. You're not going to win playoff games that way. And you're not going to build a multi-year powerhouse that way. That's the reason I didn't pick McMillan when I brought him up. I looking at his profile, I would control for this. When I write up the NFC side of field tippers, I will control for it. The fact that Tedero McMillan had a 1.84 yards per out run, of 22% targets per out, above average yards per target, earned volume, was efficient on that volume in the offense he was in. Now, some of that is, okay, the total pass volume was limited, and so you get a little bit of a boost to per attempt efficiency sometimes. The quarterbacks, I always talk about this in these types of offenses, can look better because of how run-heavy the offenses are, because they're not asked to throw in these suboptimal passing situations, because their team will run the ball on 2nd and long and then potentially even run it again on 3rd and long and then punt. You get them in a tough situation, their coach will punt and play field position essentially. And by not calling the passes on the 3rd and long or the 2nd and long in these obvious pass situations, 2nd and extra long, you get a sack on 1st down. You're like, all right, we're just going to run, punt. I mean, that's the way that these coaches are calling these games, especially in the modern NFL. That's a little bit more defense heavy at times. So anyway, that's the concern for me with McMillan. And I don't have the answer. You described it really well. It's a 1-2 turn player. It's a little bit like Garrett Wilson last year, although the real issue with Garrett Wilson was the math for me on like Justin Fields and the dropbacks and the number of sacks and scrambles, and can there be enough pass attempts that way? I think you could play into, hey, Canales might be a little bit more pass heavy in this, another season with Bryce Young.
There's also a thing where McMillan could be good enough himself that it just flat out forces it, where you're like, our team is bad offensively in every other way, but we have an absolute superstar. This is a guy who goes for 1,000 yards and scores 7 touchdowns as a rookie in that environment that you talked about, where it's going to be very tough to score. This is a guy who posted those numbers despite only having 4 double-digit target games, even though he was a target hog. The volume wasn't there. He was good. It gives you a little bit of a floor, but then the ceiling, I think, becomes very, very exciting.
I just compared him to Garrett Wilson in this range from last year. The comparison you're describing is Jackson Smith and Jigba. They were both going in the late 3rd around this time. JSN, I think, ended up kind of climbing a little, but you're describing a number 1 in a passing game that can be schemed up enough that he can dominate the volume and do what JSN just did with Seattle with Sam Darnold. Right? Like I'm talking about all these concerns about Bryce Young. And the Seahawks did the same thing that I just described. They ran the ball more than they frankly should have. The bigger difference there is they were able to stay ahead of the chains, or they're able to stay ahead of game script is the way that I was going to say that. I mean, their defense was so good. Can the Panthers, generate an elite defense and then be a good enough team to win? I mean, that's probably not going to happen, but I do think McMillan as this year's JSN is a fun comparison. That's kind of what you were just describing, was it not?
Yeah, and to be clear, I mean, JSN is such an extraordinary outcome. And I do think, and this is one of the things, that we argued about and we did encourage listeners to consider, was that rookie year for JSN was incredibly misleading because of the fact. I mean, JSN again just had one of the most extraordinary profiles coming out of any receiver. McMillan, not that good, right? But better than people think. And the type of guy who, when you're thinking about how you become a star, you have, in some ways, that Puka Nacua type of route to it. He's not going to be as physical, but he is more athletic, right? You want a guy who can make people miss despite being big, being able to challenge all levels of the field. Again, you're not going to get a Puka outcome either. But when we look at McMillan compared to like a Nico Collins, a George Pickens, a Drake London, or just the players who go immediately after him, McConkey, Rice, Higgins, a much better setup than those players have.
Definitely agree with that. The fourth round of this draft, man, there's a lot of picks I don't like. You get into a tier of receiver that is really concerning. The end of this round includes Ibuka. I like Zay Flowers, Terry McLaurin. I mean, because there's not a lot of great receivers here, you can maybe make the case in a rebound season with Jaden Daniels, at least some touchdowns. Devonta Adams, I think you're really playing with fire at this point. Jalen Waddle, we talked about how bad that offense is going to be. The quarterback play is going to be. This guy can already not stay on the field as it is, and we're going to take him at 4'11" again because he had some decent numbers when Tyreek Hill was hurt. I think Waddle's a really, really tough pick there. My favorite, so I guess my least favorite, I think my least favorite would be Devonta Adams. I just think they're going to do what they can with him and he'll have some touchdowns, but you're talking about another year older. And I just think it's a tricky pick. I mean, Ibuka at 407 after like another one like Quentin Johnston, where this first half of the season was really good, and then people just don't want to engage with how bad the second half was. And I think that's tricky. Actually, I'm going to say Waddle. Even worse than Adams. Waddle at 411, I just cannot get behind that right now.
That's super weird.
That's super weird. That's my least favorite. And then my favorite, I'm going to steal yours. I like Garrett Wilson at 403. I'm going to take Devonta Smith at 406 because I do think Brown moves on. I think you have to be taking Devonta Smith in the middle of the fourth right now. If Brown gets traded and he's the number one for this offense, now I'm into it. And you're getting the same price you always got when he was the number two, but potentially the focal point of the pass game at that point. It's a tough wide receiver range. You start to I think there's a clear teardrop from the profiles in the last round. It's weird that I'm taking Eagles receivers in 2 straight rounds, but I'm really playing into this thing that I guess I do think Brown is going to get moved and the situation is going to get better for him. I also guess I do think that the Eagles will have to throw more this year. They did fire their OC. I think they're going to have a little bit more of a modern passing game. That's what I expected going into 2025. They didn't do it, and they got embarrassed as a result. I think there's really I'm really pretty out on their coaching situation, the offensive line coach leaving, longtime offensive line coach, whoever that was, Stoutland or whatever, and feeling disrespected by Sirianni and some of the different things that Sirianni has done and is doing. And yet I do think it's tough with as much talent as the Eagles have to expect them to be even worse than last year. And it was, a pretty tough situation. I do think even if Brown isn't traded, their passing situation has to get at least somewhat better. I don't think Jalen Hurts is quite as bad as his biggest detractors believe. I don't think it's impossible to have a modern NFL offense where Jalen Hurts is your quarterback and you're running the ball and then you're throwing off of that. We've seen that with so many other offenses lately. There's no real reason in my mind with as much talent as the Eagles have on their offensive line and in other places, they can't have a more successful passing game, which they've had. They were able to have earlier on in the A.J. Brown tenure, and it was leading to Devonta Smith, even as the wide receiver 2, going at the 2-3 turn, a couple of years ago. So in the middle of the fourth round, I really like him there.
So I'm going to go with the worst pick as Javonte Williams. I think that you don't need to draft that profile at this price, even with the new contract. I'm going to make the best pick Garrett Wilson. We were concerned about him last year, and I think justifiably so. But one of the things that I mentioned is, look at what DJ Moore did with Justin Fields. And one of the things that's kind of too bad for some of these guys is that, especially if you are in a situation where everything is going to be looked at in a negative way and you kind of need some things to come together, and then you have a teammate who is maybe one of the best players in football get hurt, and then it's like, oh, well, I mean, now it's more or less game over. Then in the situation that Garrett Wilson was in last year, he played in these first 5 games relatively healthy, and in 4 of the 5 games, he had 70 yards and a touchdown. Yeah. 70 yards and a touchdown in 4 out of the 5 games. The Jets don't have to get everything together to make him a viable 2-3 pick. Certainly when you're getting him in round 4, I think that's a fantastic value.
Yeah, he was one of the guys that I was most positive about when I wrote this year's Field Tippers, which is basically just to say that it's still the same story. It's still the same thing, that his situation has been horrible. On average, for 4 years, his QB play has been horrible. The offensive situation around him has been horrible. The play calling has been horrible, meaningfully below average in all cases. He had Nathaniel Hackett one year, right? He's had terrible QB play throughout most of his career. And he just posted his second best yards per route run of his career, which all 4 years are not great, but they're not terrible. 23% plus targets per route every season. He earns volume. He is vaguely efficient considering how poor the whole situation is. I wrote in here that bringing in Frank Reich to run the offense doesn't inspire a ton of confidence, but at a certain point, the Garrett Wilson thing, it's just laughable how unfortunate this guy's career has been, in a situation where you do need support, I think, to be good in the NFL in 2026, because some of these offenses are just so non-functional. It's tricky, but it's very similar to a lot of the other things I was saying with Jefferson, Brown, those things. If you think the long view, the player's good. I mean, I love the pick. The 5th round, and it starts to really get thin. Probably in some of these upcoming rounds, the best picks are going to be rookies, but I don't know enough about the rookie profile, so I won't be picking them. Maybe you can tell the people a little bit about it. I think the worst pick in the 5th round looks pretty clear to me. It's similar to your Javonte Williams and some of the other running backs you've noted. DeAndre Swift at 503 here. I don't know how he's going in the early 5th. The Bears running game was awesome last year because of the Bears. The Bears addressed the interior of the offensive line, right? They traded for Joe Thuney and the other dude and the other guard, and signed the center, and they readdressed their entire interior offensive line. And then, I don't think Kyle Monangai is a particularly special running back either. I think Ben Johnson,
but the per play numbers were almost identical for the two.
For the two, they both looked great. But I think what you expect now going into 2026 is Ben Johnson, in my mind, will be like, hey, I should probably get a more dynamic running back. And that's not going to be easy to do or anything, but you talked about teams that are in the market for a running back. We thought all last offseason the Bears should be in the market for a running back, and didn't really want to draft Swift, didn't really want to draft Monangai, in part just because it's these are not great profiles, and they both overperform for fantasy. You don't then pay early 5th round prices. I mean, Monangai at 709, maybe that's acceptable if you're thinking he's going to survive the offseason, but man, I mean, I would be worried about them just getting a new number 1 that's better than both of these dudes. The situation is elevating for sure, but I don't know that these are going to be the guys in the situation. I'd have a hard time taking DeAndre Swift, a typically pretty fragile player throughout his career, at this stage, coming off a season where his situation elevated him at 503. That's tricky for me. The best picks in this round, I'm going to give a co-best pick to. Lamar Jackson goes 504 and Jane Daniels goes 510. In a landscape in these early drafts where the quarterbacks dried up in round 10 because there's not that many good quarterbacks, the market is saying we can't take the elite quarterbacks as high because last year wasn't a good year for elite quarterbacks, which I don't buy as that has to be the case going forward. I just think that was an interesting element of 2025. And in fact, I wrote about this a little bit right after the season with the quarterback rushing coming way down. There's an argument to be made that guys like Jackson and Daniels, who both flirted with 900 rushing yards in 2024, but got hurt in 2025, could gap the field even more. Josh Allen's quarterback one season from last year was lower than any quarterback one season in several years. The overall quarterback scoring was quite down. Again, because a lot of quarterback rushing came down. Even for I think that's more of a macro thing with the way the defenses are playing. And we talked about this a little bit, I think, Sean, on the show, but even for established guys like Jalen Hurts, for several years in a row, he had a certain number of yards and TDs. It was double-digit touchdowns, something like 600 plus rushing yards for like 4 straight years. And then he was down to like 450 rushing yards this year. I don't know the exact number. 8 rushing TDs, I think it was. That's just, I'm saying that off memory. And so to see a guy like him fall like that, or to see Daniel Jones, who back in 2022, I think we had 5 or 6 700-yard rushing QBs. This past year, we didn't have a single one hit 600 yards for the first time since, I don't know, a long time. The Josh Allen's league-leading QB rushing yards was the lowest league-leading QB number since 2009 when David Garrard did it. This is all research I did like a month and a half ago. I don't have it top of mind. But anyway, Jackson and Daniels, you're now getting a 5th-round price because they got hurt last year when the situation actually improved probably for them, where they could gap the field even more. If they actually stay healthy and have big seasons, if Jackson under a new coaching staff is able to get back to one of his best seasons, he seems to ping pong around between good seasons and tough ones. Last year was a tough one. Wouldn't be surprising if he bounced back. He's done that multiple times in his career. Jaden Daniels, still think the world of him, and like there's a ton of upside there. Little concerned about them moving on from Cliff Kingsbury. Thought that offense fit him well, and going to a very young coordinator in David Blau, but and there's just not a lot of talent around him. They need to bring him some real receivers and some different things, but I do think that Daniels is a really high-end quarterback from a skill perspective, from his ability to throw the ball and read defenses and do those things, and then adds athleticism on top of that. And those are skill sets that are really, really positive. Drake May goes right behind him. 5'12" is also interesting, but like what Jackson and Daniels can do from the rushing ceiling side of things, I mean, if they hit that, you're talking about a landscape where as soon as these guys start going, Allen went in the 3rd. These 3 quarterbacks went in the 5th. 3 more went in the 6th, 3 more in the 7th, 2 in the 8th, 4 in the 9th, 4 in the 10th. You got Mendoza going in the 11th. You know, Sam Darnold went in the 10th. Tyler Shuck went in the 10th. Like, this is the drafting landscape, and Lamar Jackson and Jane Daniels in the 5th in a landscape where Tyler Shuck's going in the 10th is a no-brainer value for me.
I love the QB point. I'm going to go in a different direction here and just start out by saying I don't think there's a bad pick in this round. The name I'll throw out is Quinshon Judkins because of the situation, because of, I think, some of the character potential risks that we start to see with some of these guys. His peripherals last year, not as good as people necessarily think. You think of him as in times carrying this offense that was so bad, the evasion rate, though not as high as people might think. That's something that actually was an issue going back to college, is that Judkins' peripherals, even as someone who went early in the reality draft, there were actually quite a few red flags there. The points above average per play as a runner, actually worse than Dylan Sampson. Again, I'm not saying that Sampson is going to come for his job or any of those types of things, but I think that there are other directions you can go and probably should go other than Judkins here. I don't think there are bad picks, though. I'm going to take Harvey, though, as the best pick, in part because you have a decent floor. You have a huge tier break after him, where the upside of everyone else, other than maybe Tootin, is dramatically lower. And when you look at that combination of floor and ceiling, and you even think about things like what do running backs do from a fantasy perspective with Sean Payton, and then be like, well, what if we also have some concerns about now, but you have some of the things that Payton wants to do in an offense, and then maybe you actually benefit from having Davis Webb. It's been interesting over the last several days, some of the discussion about how Webb is going to call plays and how he seems to be just, this savant when it comes to the play calling. I don't know that we have really the information to justify those types of things. But when you think about what the Broncos are going to be as a team, the potential for someone in this offense, the profile and the athleticism that RJ Harvey has, you think about what he was already able to do as a rookie from a touchdown scoring perspective, I mean, we already have reason to believe that he's not Alvin Kamara. And at the same time, I mean, RJ Harvey in the middle of this round as things are drying up, I really like.
I think that makes a ton of sense. In round 6, I'm going to do Tyler Warren, 602. He's the 4th tight end off the board. We took Fannin at 612. I mean, I'm kind of avoiding the guys that we actually drafted. I really like Fannin there as well. But Warren kind of tapered off in the second half of the year. Early in the year, people had him as like going to be in a tier with Bowers and McBride going forward. Like he was a clear top tight end. Now Loveland is the one who closes with the monster playoff game and the great end of the season. He's going 402. Warren's going 2 rounds behind him. I still think this offense and this passing game, and there's talk that Michael Pittman may be a cap casualty, which is the profile that probably overlaps with the Warren usage the most. He still had a really good rookie year in terms of the stuff that I look at with the field tippers, with his targets per out, his efficiency, the overall yards per out run profile. I think people think that he's like, because he fell off and because like they don't really like the offense or what have you. There was a report today that the Colts have granted Anthony Richardson the ability to seek a trade, even though Daniel Jones is injured and may not be ready for week 1 or what have you. I think he probably will be, because some of the Achilles stuff I know is a little bit quicker these days, especially with like quarterbacks. They'll probably get him back for week 1, but it doesn't seem like we'd be headed toward Richardson if Jones wasn't playing. It's like they would go a different direction offensively there. They want to be able to run an offense that does a lot of the RPOs and the quick throws and the things that they were doing a lot with Warren, where they're kind of building the pass offense around him a little bit. They like Alec Pierce, but he's a free agent. And if they cut Pittman, I mean, Tyler Warren is the focal point of this passing game going forward. It's not like a super high upside passing game, but I do really like Shane Steichen, and I like the Colts, and I still think it's a good team, even though they ran into a tough schedule late in the year and fell apart a little bit. I don't think this is Daniel Jones gets hurt, and even before he got hurt, they were playing worse, but I don't think this is a team that we should be like down on going into next year. It's one of the teams that was really intriguing about the 2025 season when we look at it in full. Like they were halfway through the year, people were like, this is the story of the season, one of at least. Jonathan Taylor, one of the top players at that point, and Warren looked like the rookie tight end, way over Loveland. Now we get a 2-round discount on that. Fannin, obviously, again, another rookie tight end that we really, really like, and then Njoku's going to be gone and is a fun one too. I think the tight ends here in the 6th are really fun, and I like Warren in particular, just because again we took. I like Fannin too. I like them both, but I like Warren because I wanted to highlight somebody a little bit different. As far as the worst pick, I will say, I don't like the receivers in this round. We have Tyson at the rookie Tyson at the front of it's Jordan Tyson, right? I don't even know his name. Is it Jordan? I'm seeing Jay yes. Tyson. Christian Watson, Rome Odunze, Cortland Sutton, Parker Washington, DK Metcalf. That's the round. That's the round 6 range. And I think you could pick literally any of them and say they're the worst pick in the round. I'm going to say Sutton. Sutton, in 2024, when I wrote up field tippers, the thing that I emphasized about Sutton was that he clearly led the team in routes still. And he still did again this year, but he was more dependent on routes than ever. His targets per out fell from a career high 22.5% in 2024 down to 19.1% in 2025. That's not a number one number. And it's more in line with the rest of his career. What he did in 2024 in that first year with Bo Nix was like a bump. It was a career high, like I said. His drop in yards per out run, it was 1.84 in 2024, which was fine. I still didn't like people wanting to take him in this mid-round. I think he was a 4th round pick last year, but 4th, 6th round is similar to me. I didn't like people wanting to take him there because it was very routes-based. He fell from 1.84 in 2024 down to 1.62 in 2025, which also fits more with his more recent seasons. A big part of Sutton's value is always going to be driven by touchdowns and deep efficiency. It's going to fluctuate year to year. the concern about the underlying stuff in 2025 on the per route basis is that it suggested that the good 2024 season was more of a spike than a baseline, and that, you know, he doesn't have some clear connection with Knicks. I think he's fine. I don't think you needed to be taking him in the 6th round in an offense that does a lot of different stuff. And then the other big element of this year was that they did try to get Troy Franklin into way more routes than any number 2 receiver. And then Franklin kind of struggled. And so late it was Pat Bryant. And if you watch the playoff games, Bryant got hurt early in both, but was starting to get work, especially he had like 3 catches on the first drive in that second playoff game, and then goes out and had 2 touches early in the first playoff game. And then I think he had a concussion in one, a hamstring in the other. It was a bummer, but had 5 touches in 2 playoff games where he ended up playing like 20 total snaps or something. But late in the regular season, Bryant getting into more routes as well, whether it's Franklin, Bryant, maybe some more Marvin Mims, whoever, more people as the future of this offense evolves. I think what we saw in 2025 is it's not going to be Sutton in the way it was in 2024. You probably shouldn't expect Cortland Sutton to be a real meaningful part of this passing. Like DK Metcalf, you can make a similar case. It's a veteran wide receiver 1, et cetera. Well, for DK Metcalf, I can look at his numbers from last year and be like, well, he's still the pretty clear number 1. And I can still I can see him being a solid number 1 again next year. I would expect that from the longer view and those things. With Sutton, low key, dig into the per route stuff. I mean, he's a bust in the 6th round for me.
Yeah, he's not going to be the wide receiver 1 for the Broncos next year, and that makes him very unpalatable at these prices. I think the flip side of that is that the other player you mentioned there, DK Metcalf, is pretty easily the best pick in this round.
Yeah.
Had the 4 wide receiver 1 finishes a year ago. You switch coaching staffs and you go from a team with Arthur Smith as the OC where they basically just want to not play football. Are you trying to see how few plays we can run? How little can we do? Can we try and run successful drives that take as many plays in the drive as possible? You switch that, you go to Mike McCarthy, and you have problems with McCarthy, right? But one of the things you love about him is the volume and the pace. And that with a guy who just has this massive moat around what he is compared to their other players. And suddenly we're talking about DK Metcalf really being someone who should probably swap spots with Jalen Waddle in terms of where they're going right now.
I love that take too. I'm looking, I scrolled down to him as I was finishing up my notes on Sutton in my field tipper stuff. And one of the other notes that I had here, including all the stuff that you just said, was that they did a lot of fun stuff with him last year with Aaron Rodgers, who does seem like he's probably going to be back with Pittsburgh. And I just highlighted some of the quick catch and run slants and the quick hitting stuff they did to just get the ball in his hand. I wrote that it was good to see that his usage expanded in that way as well. Yeah, I mean, a little bit concerned about McCarthy, and then their new OC is Brian Angelichio. I don't know how to say it. And he's a 53-year-old first-time coordinator in an offseason where everyone was going really young. Like he was a Vikings passing game coordinator the last 4 years with Kevin O'Connell. Maybe there's some, optimism there, but kind of an interesting. I'm not super optimistic about the coaching staff and the team in the direction they're going in. But I've concluded this paragraph saying Metcalf's a good wide receiver squarely in his prime when you look at all the other stuff. And anyway, I agree with you. I think it's another good highlight by you. 6'11". I mean, that's in this landscape where we're talking about a lot of these other receivers as not being very good picks in the 2 rounds ahead of him. He should be going quite a bit higher, like you said.
And just instead of picking the worst pick, because I do agree with you, I'm just going to mention quickly, Jordan Tyson isn't my pick for this round because Metcalf is a much better selection. But I do think that Tyson is a clear tier break ahead of the rest of the guys in this round, belongs with the players more back in the previous round. He is a tier down from Lemon and Tate in the rookie guide, but he's someone I do expect to go early. I mentioned that I'm not that excited about this wide receiver class, and some of my favorite guys are players who you can get later, like our 11th round pick here. But that is, I think, kind of a fun note on him, and that pick definitely made sense to me.
Yeah, definitely. So you agree with the Sutton thing? You would probably take a Dunze too. Any shot you can take at my UW guy at Dunze. I'm surprised you passed it up. An opportunity to
start getting there in round 6. Maybe he starts catching some passes. There's a chance that the worst pick in round 5 was Luther Burden by you and me.
Yeah, I mean, it is possible. Round 7, 3 more quarterbacks, which leaves the non-quarterback options in a tricky spot, which, I mean, I've taken quarterbacks on these picks. I'm going to say, Chuba Hubbard going 707, the fact that, I understand the Panthers still really like him and Dowdle's going to be gone, but the fact that he lost his job last year to Dowdle and was pretty clearly a bust being drafted in this sort of dead zone-y range. What about Chuba Hubbard's profile has him back in the dead zone here?
He was taking that job back from Dowdle by the end of the season.
He was doing okay. I guess I started on my least favorite pick when I don't like a lot of the picks in this round. I typically don't like the values are tricky this year. And
that's one of the macro things from the previous season is that the successful outcomes were very concentrated on a certain group of players. And so much of what we do see is the potential for that to continue.
Totally. I'm going to take Pearsall. I do think the Niners are going to be better next year. And I don't really like Ricky Pearsall, but especially in best ball, I think they're going to focus more on him. Ayuk's obviously going to be gone. Deebo Samuel's long gone. I really do think it's a thing where like he's productive when they scheme stuff for him, and Kyle Shanahan is really trying to focus the game plan on him. But there's times where he like doesn't want to do that anymore. I haven't written the NFC side of the per out run stuff, so I'll actually be interested to see what I think about his profile. Yeah, 1.85 yards per out run last year in year 2, way up from 1.31. I mean, he was, as a rookie, he was good at times last year. That was sort of the way that I remembered it and what I would have expected, and why when we were in the draft, I was interested in taking him at the 6-7 turn. I think at 705 in this landscape, again, where there's a lot of tricky receiver picks, Pearsall's somebody that I'm certainly willing to get some exposure to.
What are your thoughts on the Jaguars receivers? We obviously took Travis Hunter in round 13 with both Washington going at the end of 6 and Myers going at the end of 7. They obviously trade for him. They extend him, and he immediately fixes the problems with the offense that it seemed like the emphasis on Brian Thomas and Travis Hunter were creating, or was creating. And yet the stats, the fantasy numbers dry up completely down the stretch, and it is Washington, and that's obviously why Washington is going earlier in these drafts. And yet we have this player in Jakobi Meyers who seems like he is a favorite of the coaching staff, and also someone who has scored in this, wide receiver 2-3 range like clockwork in bad environments from 2021 through 2025. You got that consistency there and the potential for an eruption if he is the guy in this Jaguars offense, where maybe I'm overly enthusiastic about Jacksonville. I really like them to be the AFC Super Bowl entrant this year, except for how difficult their path was going to be. And then that path turned out to be a huge landmine with losing to the Bills right off the bat. One of the issues that we're looking at here with Jakobi Meyers is simply, is he the kind of game breaker that you need? Does he have the profile that you need, especially in best ball, but just in fantasy in general, where this is a guy who, from a yardage perspective, is like a metronome, but the last 2 seasons, only 7 touchdowns total.
Yeah, he's a fascinating one. I wrote a ton about the Jags receivers in the Field Tippers thing. At the end of it, I talked about how these 3 guys have such similar ADPs, and said my biggest feeling is that they're probably collectively overpriced, but I do think at least one of them is probably going to wind up a good pick in those ranges. And at least one was sort of my thought, that I think maybe 2 of them will win, sort of. And it's tough to know who. My concern with Thomas, who's obviously had the incredible rookie year, I think you can compared a little bit to McConkey. I know you and I disagree a little bit on those prospect profiles, but I had some concerns about Thomas's prospect profile. Then after the rookie year, I was like, well, this guy's obviously good, and I was just wrong about the prospect profile. And then after the second year, I'm like, well, now I want to go back to those concerns I had about the prospect profile. And that's similar to McConkey in my mind, where there's pros and cons in the prospect profile, and now this tough second year impacts. I think Thomas is good, and I think he's clearly good at the things he's good at, which is the playing the ball and the after the target efficiency. But the targets per out created 6 percentage points from year 1 to year 2. And the yards per out dropped nearly a full yard. I mean, he was way, way worse. And I think that speaks to him not being a great fit within the offensive system, the new Liam Cohen system, and with Trevor Lawrence, because so much of what he did the year prior was with Mac Jones. Those are the things that people are saying. I think it is that simple to some degree. I don't think that's ideal going into year 3 for him, because I think there's this, I think he's like a really good player that is not in a great situation for him, great in the right circumstances. I wrote, typically, I still want exposure to guys when I feel situational changes can quickly make them into stars, but this is one where cost becomes important. I say all that about starting on Brian Thomas first, because he's the one going the highest, and he's the most interesting, I think, overall profile, former first-round pick, et cetera, and had the huge rookie year and was going in the first round of drafts. We loved him. Our first 1-2 turn last year. Washington actually was better than Myers down the stretch. It's so funny because from the point where Jacoby Myers was acquired, Parker Washington posted the 3rd best yards per out run in the entire NFL behind only Puka Nacua and Jackson Smith and Jigba. He was a star from that point forward. Myers was good as well, though, and he was a little better than his time with the Raiders. And my note on Myers was there's a clear difficulty in boarding a moving train, that quote from Mike Tomlin that we've talked about. And look at Rashid Shaheed, barely did anything with the Seahawks, right? And I don't think Rashid Shaheed's bad. I just think it's tough to learn a whole new offensive system on the fly. So my note on Myers was, while his full season yards per out run was on the lower end of his past few seasons, it wasn't in a way that makes me think he's regressed. He probably did a bit better than expectations after the trade, given how difficult those things can be. So I'm with you. Myers was the other one that stuck out to me here that would have been my other pick other than Pearsall, from the perspective that I think going into the second year with the Jags, a full offseason, Cohen went out and traded for him and used him quite a bit as if they really needed to get a lot out of him, even though he didn't particularly know the offense, and he was fine. I think there's an opportunity for him to really take off in the next year. And I think I like him more than Brian Thomas, just because of the way that the fit is with Trevor Lawrence and then within the offense, and they're kind of going different directions. Parker Washington is the real fly in the ointment. I don't know what to make out of Parker Washington at all. The fact that he was that dominant in yards per out run down the stretch, I think a lot of that is probably small sample efficiency. If you look at the full season, he's only at a 2.06 yards per out, which is good, but it's not it's just good. It's it's like the down AJ Brown year I was talking about, which obviously AJ Brown's a very unique player, but 9.6 yards per target, it's good. Targets per out run for the season was good. He just closed his season on an absolute tear, but that was after the offense shifted a bit and they made him more of a focal point. I guess I wouldn't bet on that carry or against that carrying over. So I understand the hype on him a bit. It's tricky. You asked my opinion on this receiving core. I think it's really tricky. I think all 3 of those guys are really tricky. It could be Washington, who completely goes away, and the more higher profile from a longer perspective in fantasy duo of Thomas and Myers clearly went out, or it could be Washington really had a breakout last year and it's the number 1. And then I think it's probably Washington and Myers, and Thomas is just he's a deep threat, an efficiency deep threat type that's just not getting enough targets, but is scoring some touchdowns and stuff. It's a little bit like a Cortland Sutton profile or something. Yeah, I could see this going a lot of different ways. And you throw in Brenton Strange and you throw in some of the other stuff. Obviously, some of the usage that Travis Hunter will get. It's not like he's not going to play on offense. I think the Jags are one of the trickier teams. I thought you were going to ask me about the Cardinals with Harrison and Wilson. That's the other one. I have no idea. But some of these passing games, some of the wide receiver situations, I think are very much what does the coach want to do in terms of building their offense? Who do they want to make into a focal point or a feature? There's some minor rumors that Brian Thomas could get moved because he's not necessarily a great fit. So I think the Jags are a really fascinating one for sure.
So the Jags are super interesting. am just going to throw out Jackson Dart as the best pick in this round. I don't think that tactically you necessarily want to be making that selection, but it is fun. It is after the team that drafted Neighbors had passed on him, which is a little bit interesting. Jackson Dart, the next guy to blow up and just score a huge number of points. The worst pick, I think, is Alec Pierce. You have some exciting elements for him where, I mean, almost doubles the next closest Colt in air yards and is efficient with a lot of those, blows up from the kind of that breakout perspective. But when we think about a guy breaking out in year 4, we think about a guy relying on this vertical element to his game. Now he misses a couple games, but I mean, this is the player who was 4th on the Colts in targets. And granted, you can move some other people off. Perhaps Michael Pittman won't be back, but there's still a really low floor to this. Now, from a best ball perspective, you're mostly excited about the high ceiling of the vertical ability and the spike weeks. If we're thinking more globally about fantasy football, and even a lot of the things around Alec Pierce and his free agency, he seems like the main player. Well, I mean, there'll be plenty of people who are overpaid, but a lot of things we're seeing about the contract for Alec Pierce and those types of things feel very out of whack with his overall career production to this point. And if the idea is that you have this great coordinator and you have Daniel Jones, I mean, there are problems with both of those things, including whether Daniel Jones will be there and how healthy he'll be. But I mean, if that's your argument, why not get a better vertical receiver than Alec Pierce to just fill in for that spot? This one feels like a forced type of move from the fantasy community where they're saying this is an exciting offense. This guy had a good year. But when you look at Alec Pierce overall, it's really difficult to justify this price.
I think another great call. I'm agreeing with all of them, but I wrote he makes more sense in that first group outside the wide receiver window, where his best ball friendly profile would be worth prioritizing with an ADP in the triple digits. And that he went, when I wrote this, his ADP was currently 79.7. He went pick 80 here. So yeah, when I wrote him up a couple weeks ago, I thought he was 20 picks overvalued at minimum. To your point, like his yards per target was over 12 for the second straight year by PFS numbers, which they take away some of the targets that are not catchable. But downfield efficiency, like he's been really good at playing the ball. He's made some awesome plays. And I think that's why people are so excited about him. But deep efficiency tends to be one of the most difficult things to sustain. To your point, he was 4th on the team in targets. There wasn't even a ton of volume here. He's just been really, really good, making a lot of great plays down the field. And then he's another great example of that point I made earlier. And you said that, like, when you were just talking about him, like in 2025, he had a great year. We have more than just last year of data on this player. Like there's 3 other seasons of data here. They're all weaker versions of 2025. It's a deep threat that didn't do as well as last year. It was clearly last year. I mean, he's gotten better, sure, but like last year was a breakout year, and the market is just like so fixated on last year. It's like this long view thing is just such an edge still. Alec Pierce is an interesting player who had a spike year last year, but my God, like look at the rest of the career. There's 3 other seasons there that are relevant. Round 8. We moved to round 8. Oh my gosh. I haven't even looked at it yet. I'm going to say Quentin Johnston's the worst pick because I already made that case earlier. And I think he's 20 picks overvalued as well. Mostly because it's a really crowded room. Again, I don't think Quentin Johnston can't score. It's very similar to the Alec Pierce thing. It's like you're talking about deep efficiency. You're talking about some spike stuff. I do think the offense is going to be interesting. I do think Mike McDaniel adds a lot, but I don't think that means Quentin Johnston is going to suddenly be a player that justifies the opportunity cost of not taking an 8th round pick that could be a really meaningful addition to any build. And there's obviously still a lot of guys here that are really interesting, including his teammate Gadsden also went in the 8th round. I think that'll probably be your pick for that. But I mean, let's just tie it in. I'll just do a theme post and say Johnson's the worst pick and Gadsden's the best pick. What do you got?
Well, I'm going to say that Stefon Diggs is, he's got to be the worst pick by a mile. Because
I was going to agree with you, but I was waiting for where that would go. And by a mile.
You and I love Stefon Diggs. And Stefon Diggs was basically like the poster boy for RotoViz for like a decade. He does have 1,000 yards last year, but you're talking about someone who ran 43 fewer routes than Hunter Henry.
Yeah.
We're talking about somebody who, he had like the weakest 1,000-yard season you can have just overall, but also if you don't have anybody vying for targets with you, because they did not, and you have Drake May having Drake May just had the greatest season in NFL history in terms of the eyeball test. That's not even a thing, but it was the best one ever, right? And you're going to go for 1,004. The Patriots are going to have other options next year. Stefon Diggs probably be, I don't know, even what team he'll be on. He will not be a focal point, and he will not be a top 10 pick, a first 10-round pick when we get into August.
It's another great one. Another thing I'll add on him is he had a terrible playoff run. Much was made about how easy their schedule was in the regular season and how difficult it was in the playoffs. And I know they played a couple weather games, but he never had more than 40 yards in any of their 4 playoff games. Combined, he had 110 yards, 20 targets over 4 games. I think that led the team, but it was way more spread out when the chips were down in the postseason and when they had to play some tougher defenses. Throughout the regular season, there were some plus matchups, and there's some situations where he got a lot of volume and had some big games. But like you said, he has a really great per route profile, but he only ran 419 routes by PFF, which is really, really low. They were really using him situationally, and then basically throwing to him when he was on the field because they needed him to go win in some of these situations. But yeah, if you look at the schedule adjusted stuff, like you said, one of the weakest 1,000-yard seasons. They play a really weak schedule, and he puts up some big numbers. Also has plenty of down games as well. Several games of under like 30 yards in the regular season. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 at 32 yards or lower this year. And then he had, a couple big games. He had a couple of 5 100-yard games. But yeah, I think we saw the age. He's a 32-year-old now. And then you also didn't mention the off-field stuff. Like there's the possibility that he's like suspended next year or something. There was some stuff that came out late in the season.
Dead cap.
I also
$8 million for him.
Yeah, I noted in this write-up, if they did a post-June 1 designation, they could free up more than $20 million and only cost 5.7 in dead money. He's probably going to get cut if the off-field stuff is serious. Why would they keep him?
I'm going to go with Sam Laporta as the best pick. I just really like Laporta's talent. I think you draft him when he's cheap. I think the gap between him and Tyler Warren, probably exploitable. I think the gap between him and Jameson Williams, probably exploitable. Maybe there's just too much stuff with the injury background to make that super clear. But anytime that you have these congested, explosive offenses and you have a guy coming off of a tricky situation and they get pushed way down. George Kittle has always been someone who was very easy to play because when the volume is how he was priced, you would draft him. When the efficiency was how he was priced, you would fade him. I'm going to take Laporta because you've already taken Gadsden.
You said the gap between him and Warren is exploitable. I took Warren as my favorite in the 6th round. Speak on that. What is your concern about Warren?
Well, I think when you're looking at this, and even if you lose Pittman, but you add somebody else, or you think about Josh Downs being more involved, one of the things with the Colts is that we're not that far removed from Josh Downs looking like the guy who was going to be the breakout star for the Colts. You want these elite players and explosive offenses, but as we're trying to avoid getting Warren on every team, or we're concerned about what happened to him after the Daniel Jones injury, you're thinking about what the different scenarios are for these two different players, I think that we can still make the case that Sam Laporta really did more or less justify the extraordinarily high prices from a couple of years ago, and then bad luck has pushed him down. I think that the best version of the Lions is one where Sam Laporta is playing like one of the best tight ends in football, and not just playing like it, but is getting the volume that respects that. That it's not a 3-player team of Gibbs and Amon-Ra and Jamison Williams, whom I love, but is being pretty aggressively priced. I think that Laporta makes that a quartet. And in that case, you've got to like him as being the exploitable way to play the Detroit Lions.
Okay, got it. So you don't like 800-yard rookie seasons for tight ends, but you do like 800-yard rookie seasons for tight ends when the next 2 years are not 800 yards again. That makes sense. No, I'm just kidding. No, Tyler Warren, I'm gonna stick by that one. I like his cost there. He's underrated. 9th round, 4 quarterbacks in this round, and they're all boring ones. Purdy, Mayfield, Goff, and Stafford. We got my UW guy, Denzel Boston, in there. A rookie receiver whose like analytics profile I don't know particularly well. I don't think it's going to be great, but I do think was a good player at UW. And I mean, everyone always does the will your bias thing, and I always have to hammer my credentials that I've basically said that most of the UW players are not good. So I don't know why everyone would think I was biased. I don't think Boston's going to be a star or anything. This is both him and Jonah Coleman have gotten a lot more love in the process than I would have probably anticipated. But maybe they'll be good. I don't know their profiles particularly well yet from the sort of analytics side, just from what I've seen. And I think both are like interesting. Jonah Coleman, to me, the pro comp is like a Josh Jacobs. Like he can do everything and he's kind of physical and can catch the ball, can handle a lot of touches and stuff, but isn't some kind of superstar. Boston is like a total Michael Pittman, Drake London type, like a sort of big frame, thicker X receiver that is good in the red zone. But again, you know, these different types of like player comps and things, like the type of player they are doesn't mean that they're going to be good or bad necessarily at the next level. Because, you know, we know for any archetype, there's usually good versions of them. And then there's ones that look like that player, but never end up actually being good. And, you know, a lot of the stuff that we look at is the actual production that leads to that, whether they would be good or not. Anyway, I'm not going to pick Boston. Haven't looked into the profile enough. I'd be interested in your thoughts on those Huskies. The best pick in this round is tough, though, because we took Worthy at the front of it, 901. Then you have Tyler Algier, because I guess he's leaving Atlanta and people think he's going to be a starter at this point in his career. I'm going to say that's the worst pick. Tyler Algier at 902, because we're just projecting him into 250 touches already. Like, that is a disaster of a pick. Rico Dowdle at 903. I mean, he at least had a good enough year last year that I can see why people might think that he would get a bunch of touches next year. Pittman at 904. He's recently been talked about as a cut candidate. Tony Pollard is 908. Montgomery's 909. And you have Boston and you have Dalton Kincaid 912, which Kincaid has never gotten the routes. That was always a concern. He didn't get a good per route profile this year, did not get enough routes. And that passing game and elevating Joe Brady, I mean, what's the ceiling? I don't really know why I would chase Kincaid in the 9th. The guy, man, I mean, it's probably Worthy, the guy that we took. I've been trying to avoid our picks, but I'll say Algier's the worst. The guy that I'm going to say is the best pick here, which is kind of a weird one, is going to be Tony Pollard. I talked to you a little bit about Montgomery. I'm curious your thoughts on Montgomery. He would be the other one of the veteran running backs in this round. But Pollard, 4.5 yards per carry last year, handled a lot of work again. I mean, he's going to be 29 next year. I'm trying to remember what his contract situation is, because I remember writing about him, and I always want to write very favorably about Tyjae Spears. But Pollard, again, was a legitimately solid rusher. And Spears, like, always flashes and stuff like missed tackles forced, but he doesn't have great numbers. And I think some of that speaks to the situation and the team not being very good. And the fact that Pollard was able to actually handle quite a bit of work and do some decent things. Is he going to be a free agent? I guess I don't know what his situation is, but multiple coaches now have felt that Tony Pollard was worth using ahead of Tyjae Spears, who's a guy that we've liked, a legitimately very interesting player. Yeah, they can cut Pollard and only have $2 million in debt, and it would be like a $7 million plus in savings. And so he may get cut going into his age 29 season, or he may still be their lead back. I'm not sure. If he does get cut, I guess I think there's enough in his recent seasons to suggest that he'd probably still land somewhere where he could make a little bit of noise. Again, you talked about a landscape where the running backs are not good, basically, after the 5th round. Tony Pollard, the back half of the 9th round, is one of those that I think you could justify. Again, this is picking from a very limited number of options for the best pick in the 9th round, but I'm going to take him.
Yeah, I like that. I think that Dowdle has to be, at least in the conversation, as the worst pick when you think about the uncertainty with his outlook, and that's ahead of Pollard, Montgomery, and Jonah Coleman, who goes early in the 10th. Obviously, Dowdle did some fantastic things for a month and a half last season, but it still ends up being tough. And Dowdle is one of those guys where you want to pick him when the price works. I'm going to go with Michael Pittman as the best selection. I don't know what team he'll be on next year, but I mean, if he's cut and it's in a better situation, then it's not problematic at this price. This is a guy who's been a fantasy wide receiver 2 in 4 of the last 5 years. He was the wide receiver 14 when Daniel Jones went down last year. And that's within the context of Alec Pierce being someone that people love. You just, doubled down on Tyler Warren. We know that Josh Downs Michael Pittman, middle of round 9, wide receiver 14 when his quarterback gets injured last season. It's not the most exciting pick, and certainly there's going to be a best ball versus other formats element to it, but there are just simply too many fantasy points for him to still be around.
Yeah, another good one. He's I guess I did the quick thing of being like, well, he's going to get cut, or there's talk that he's going to get cut. But when I wrote him up in Field Tippers was before I saw that, and I was optimistic about him. He remains a decent player. He was at a 3-year low in yards per out run. He had the lowest targets per out run since his rookie season, but they had some other stuff going on. I wrote that he was solid. I always pegged him as more of an ancillary wide receiver thrust into a number 1 role early in his career. We're seeing that more as his career progresses, but that doesn't mean he's not worth a pick in this range when you start talking about like Stefon Diggs going at 802, which again,
you've got a physical receiver, right? That one of the things people were concerned about him, and especially for best ball, is you don't score any touchdowns, but he scored 7 touchdowns last season, which isn't some huge number, but it does undercut this idea that he can never find the end zone. We're talking about an explosive team during that, Daniel Jones timeframe, and he shared in that.
For sure. Round 10, some interesting receivers come up in round 10. You have Jawan Jennings, 1001. You have Jalen Coker, 1004. Jaden Reed, 1006. Golden, 1007. Chris Godwin, 1008. Jaden Higgins is who we took at 1012. I think you can make a favorable case for literally every single one of those guys. I'm gonna pick Chris Godwin. Evans might be gone. I don't think Ibuka was so dominant. They paid Godwin a lot of money. I'm a little bit concerned, but he was coming off a pretty significant injury last year. I do still think Baker Mayfield's a guy that can create value for guys. When Godwin was back, even though he didn't look right, he was better than Ibuka, basically. It's weird to me that he's going where he is. I do like the Packers receivers here as well, but the route stuff is still so concerning for me. I'm a little bit more concerned about last year I made a big deal about Jaden Reed and Josh Downs. It not being as big of a concern that they don't play in 3 receiver sets as much. And then we saw the league really go away from 3 receiver sets. And that's one of the specific points that I made a decent amount last offseason that I think missed the boat. And I, especially because the league moved that direction, I need to be more cautious of going forward. Reed's profile one we really, really like, but the overall number of routes a little bit concerning. But yeah, I mean, I think Like, I don't know what the Niners are going to do at receiver, but I liked Pearsall several rounds earlier. I don't think Juwan Jennings is like great, but like, are we just not drafting 49ers receivers or something? Like, I mean, like, this is a good offense. It's a Kyle Shanahan offense, probably. There's got to be somebody that's going to catch some passes there. Coker, I thought, was very good this year. All these receivers in this range look pretty intriguing to me. The worst pick, I'm going to say, is Woody Marks. He's going 10-10. He's going quite a bit later than I would have actually expected because people seem to really, really like him this year. But I don't think there's a clearer example of a player who got significant volume this year, and you have to consider really, really fragile at this point in the offseason. If you're going to take any Woody Marks, it's got to be after a whole offseason and he survives it somehow. They went into the year thinking he'd play more of a bit role and they'd have Joe Mixon. Then the Joe Mixon health stuff deteriorated, obviously. They went forward with Marks. They brought in Nick Chubb and used some Nick Chubb, but clearly Nick Chubb was not what he had been pre-injury. Marks' efficiency is really pretty poor across the board. I saw a lot of people make, whatever. I was going to say make excuses. I'm not trying to be overly critical, but a lot of stuff about him having some different injuries and some of those things. A lot of snaps, a lot of playing time for him, not a lot of production. He had like more than 15 or 16 PPR points, like just I think the one time early on. Then I think he had a decent playoff game there, but they still like him. They'll probably still use him, but the Texans are like as needy of a running back team as there is in the whole league. We've talked about a couple of them. I would expect them to really try to address that. They do some weird stuff from a personnel perspective. I think they do really like him as a pass protector and in the passing game, which was sort of his profile. And I think that can still be there. The problem is CJ Stroud doesn't throw to the backs. Woody Marks only had like 21 catches in a season where he was the lead running back. So now if he's going to be like Dare Ogunbowale, you're literally looking at like potentially 15 catches, even though he may play a lot in passing downs. Because Stroud is a very vertical passer, or else he'll take some sacks or some of those things. And so, I would expect somebody else to get a lot of the early down rushes because he just wasn't good enough. I just don't know how you could take him in the 10th round.
So I think it's hard to pass on Jennings, as you mentioned. I guess my only concern would be the combination of age, injuries, and then it sounds like it's pretty likely he won't be back with the 49ers. And at that point, maybe I do wonder if the Kyle Shanahan genius and just the competency that we get from guys like Brock Purdy, is that what is boosting him? And then, just the efficiency last year wasn't quite as strong. He is such a fun name to be available this late. Man, the Packers receivers are tough. I mean, you go back and you're like, oh, these guys are going to break out. They're going to break out. Christian Watson is being drafted pretty aggressively. I've got a ton of Watson in Dynasty and love parts of what he does. And certainly he came back and was a vertical threat, scored touchdowns, did those types of things. And then you look at this situation where they get in the shootout with the Chicago Bears, and you're right back to who got the targets? Romeo Doubs, 11 targets in that playoff game. You get 7 and 7 for Reed and Watson and just 5 for Matthew Golden. And yet the thing I left that game with is that if they end up with a guy who is going to be an absolute star, it's going to be Matthew Golden. Mm-hmm. And it's not the way to look at things, right? It's absolutely not the way to look at things. But when you watch that final game and you see him in the role that they envision for him, he's a guy who didn't have much of a profile, really. And so it's a very aspirational pick in round 1. But when you think about the physical attributes of Matthew Golden, and then someone who probably was going to be a slow build because he just needed to do a lot of work still, and then deals with injuries as a rookie. But that final piece where, you're looking at him in that playoff game and saying, yes, this is a guy where if they do have someone who can consolidate and be explosive, it's going to be Matthew Golden.
There's a lot of people in the fantasy community that were looking at in the dynasty community that were looking at the prospect profile saying he was a bad first round pick. And I saw a lot of victory lapping about how bad his statistical profile was during the season. And I think to a certain degree, that's fair. I mean, if you were really out on him and he had a tough rookie year, that's justifiable. Something I would add to that, and I was writing about in Stealing Signals for most of the year, is that in week 2, I think it is, as I'm looking at the game log against the Commanders, he got 2 targets, didn't catch either of them. They both should have been long touchdowns. One was a post route he clearly won on, and Jordan Love threw very late, and a trailing cornerback caught up to the play and dove and tipped it away. The other one was like, would have been like an 80-yard TD if I'm not misremembering. He got loose and Love overthrew it. So I believe it was the very next week against Cleveland here in their loss. He gets led out of bounds on what could have been an 80 or a 90-yard touchdown where he was free, and Love threw it kind of over his outside shoulder and he caught it. But like his fade route, instead of being able to catch it on the run, had to lean out of bounds, and he lost his footing. There was multiple plays early in the season this year that he could have had the really big splash play touchdown. And I just mentioned that because I faded him as well. And watching the games and writing about him in the early going in Stealing Signals, I was calling it kind of noise that he hadn't been very productive early. We all know how the explosive plays can really impact stuff like yards per route run. For example, you get one huge play, you don't run a ton of routes in this offense. It has a very significant impact. His yards per route run ended up very poor. And so again, there's always degrees of this. When I make these kinds of caveat points, I want to caveat the fact that he did have a really poor per route run profile and a poor season and didn't draw a lot of volume. And there are obvious concerns by just saying that if he had hit on a few of those things, it would look better. It wouldn't necessarily look amazing, right? But when I say that, if he had, and I know a lot of people are like, well, this and that, it's, it didn't happen. What happened? I think he did his part on all of those plays is what I'm trying to describe, that he got open vertically, which is the goal for this guy. On a longer,
and unlike some other players out there, we know that Jordan Love's efficiency was fantastic. And so you wouldn't expect necessarily continued QB misses on important plays for him, right? This isn't one of those situations where you have a bottom 10 quarterback and you're like, okay, well, that's just the way it is.
Exactly what I'm trying to say. Yeah. It felt so fluky. And then, he struggled from there on out. I do wonder if like some of the ways he was deprioritized after Christian Watson came back, some of that stuff, would that have been impacted by if he would have had a couple of long touchdowns early, right? Like, does that change some of his own usage that he had gotten some stuff on the board in, as far as some productive plays? Because he had that window where Reed was out and Watson was out and he was getting a little bit more volume. And then, later in the season, they cut him down. Week 14, he plays 5 snaps. That was coming off maybe a little bit of an injury, but 25 or fewer snaps in 6 straight games, it looks like, from week 9 through to week 17. And prior to that, he had 40 plus in 6 straight games. This is just raw snaps. I'm just looking at his game log. So the early part of the season, he gets a ton of volume in his first games of his career, and they're hoping for a lot from him, and there's some near misses, and there's a little bit of production. And then they get some guys back, and they pull him back a little bit. It's a weird rookie year, the way that it all goes. But to your point, that playoff game, he did look really good in that game, and certainly one that is relevant in the context of all of this.
So not to dogpile Marks, but the reporting is that the Texans are looking for a bell cow starter. So I think you have to look at Marks more in the vein of guys who are going in rounds 14, 15, 16, which would make him the weakest pick here in 10. You have some more guys here, 11, 12, 13 you like?
Yeah, we're at 2.5 hours now. Another note I want to say on Golden, though. He did run a bunch of routes in week 18. I was just looking at this. I was like, he only had 1 catch, but I was pretty sure this was a game that they weren't starting Love. They played Clayton Tune, and they had 34 passing yards. They actually had negative net passing yards. He went 6 for 11 for 34 yards and had 41 yards lost in sacks for a -7 net yards. For people who don't remember this week 18 game, pretty astonishing stuff from the Packers as they went to Clayton Tune in that final game. So anyway, Golden, one of his bigger playing time opportunities in week 18 in the second half of his rookie year, other than that playoff game, was one where they basically didn't have any passing volume at all or any passing production. And then the playoff game, he gets to play with Love in a little bit more of a role and has a good game. I think, he's interesting. He's interesting. But yeah, we're going on 2.5 hours. As far as the rest of it goes, Kittle going in the 11th. How hurt is he? That seems favorable. But yeah, I just sort of looking at it and throwing out names would be the way that I would be going about it, because I don't know a ton of stuff. I think Dobbins in the 12th round is interesting, even if he's not back with Denver. Had one of the better years of his career last year. I don't know anything about the health of Tyreek Hill, but he's going in the 12th round, and his per route profile was still very good last year until he got hurt. You mentioned Dobbs. He's going in the 12th as a guy who he's a fourth receiver on his own team going off the board, but seems to get a lot of volume. A lot of tight ends in that 12th round too. Jake Ferguson, for a while, people were last year were losing their minds talking about him as like he's a top 5 overall tight end. He's back in the 12th round because he closed the season poorly. Probably still a fine pick there, but I think I even like Brenton Strange and Juwan Johnson in that round better. 2 guys that are in interesting offenses, good coaching staffs, and both had their moments last year. We took Travis Hunter in the early 13th. Jerry Jeudy goes 1303. Josh Downs 1304. Pat Bryant 1309 are interesting names to me. Booty, Jalen McMillan at 1310. Those would be ones I would avoid. Brandon Ayuk 1312. Do we even know Brandon Ayuk's going to play this year? Those are tricky.
Well, we know that he didn't rehab his previous injury and that the 49ers don't like him. That's what we know.
Yeah. Trey Benson 1308. That's fascinating. Why would he go that late?
Well, he's swiftly put himself in that Marshawn Lloyd category of the next time that we see you carry.
But why would Tyler Algier go 902 if like oh, he's going to be in a lead role? Has he signed somewhere that I'm not aware of? Is Tyler Algier starting running back? The free agency is not open. I'm being facetious. I'm confused about Trey Benson because James Conner at this stage, with the significant injury he had, probably not the guy they're going to go into next year, assuming is the starting back. There was some, I did hear some talk that the Cardinals might be in the market for a different back, but that's understandable early speculation in the offseason when they closed the season last year with Bam Knight and Emery Demercado because they lost both of their top 2 backs. Doesn't mean that Benson's not a guy that they're going to give opportunities to if he's able to stay healthy. He's still on his rookie deal, and he looked decent last year. I don't know. Seems like an interesting pick in the 13th round to me. Adonai Mitchell, 14-11, got a lot of volume last year. I'm not like thrilled about the efficiency for the second straight year, but the Jets aren't good. The quarterback play was terrible. The fact that he got traded to a new spot and started drawing volume right away. 14-11? Probably take that bet. I don't know. Any other ones you're looking at?
Well, when we talk about that very next round, Emmett Johnson is one of my favorite rookies for this year. We'll see kind of how that moves over the next couple of months, and I feel as strongly at draft time. He's one of these players who's got some great numbers and is incredibly fun to watch. He's a little bit on the smaller side, but then obviously we have witnessed what Bucky Irving, someone who didn't even test well, was able to do. It'll be fascinating to see how the NFL views Johnson there. I was going to say some of these tight ends in round 12 are pretty interesting because you do seem to have a massive tier break after those guys. And then obviously when you get late, it's exciting to think about where like a Sean Tucker might be, where a Jonathan Brooks might be. Obviously with Singleton, you've got some injury concerns and just a very complicated profile even without that. Eli Stowers in round 17, pretty intriguing. Could he be, this year's Harold Fannin? Yeah, it's fun to have these drafts. It's fun to have 20 rounds so you can play around both with the positional limits and with some deep players. Again, the fact that we got a Okonkwo in 19 is, I think, pretty fun. He's someone where you would kind of expect him to be going back up in that Hunter Henry range, probably by the time
there's some interesting.
We're back into August.
There's some interesting late tight ends for sure. You have Njoku in the 15th. I mean, he's the same thing as Okonkwo. He's going to land somewhere else. I probably would keep Njoku ahead of Okonkwo. I don't think Dalton Schultz is interesting, really, but I mean, in the 16th round, but TJ Hawkinson for sure to me. It doesn't make any sense at 16-10. I don't understand it. He's a former top 10 overall pick. I understand he's not been that forever or whatever, but yes, they have, Jefferson, they have Addison, they have all these other things. He was deprioritized, et cetera, et cetera. If they get any kind of an improvement in their passing game, TJ Hawkinson at 16-10 is just a bizarre price. And I think he would be another one that I would expect to rise. Anything else?
No, I think that's the right place to wrap it up. This was a fun exercise. We end up with CJ Stroud, Derek Carr, and Simpson as our quarterbacks. Ben, with Stroud actually having a pretty decent season last year from a per play perspective and breaking out with Nico Collins bouncing back, with Jaden Higgins breaking out, with Jalen Noel, who you wanted to draft late, breaking out. I mean, he's going to be one of the best QB picks. And then when Derek Carr leads the Minnesota Vikings to a Super Bowl championship in his 2026 as Sam Darnold, we didn't even really need to draft a third QB here. This was fun. Kind of a silly team, kind of teams you can build early. I love having Bijan, Bucky, Brees, Henderson, and Bashal Tutin. Love having Jordan Addison, Xavier Worthy. I mentioned Emmett Johnson as one of my favorite running backs, Concepcion there as one of the favorite receivers. We'll see what Travis Hunter does as a receiver this season. We got Terrence Ferguson as a breakout tight end pick late. We were willing to take some old dudes with Calvin Ridley in there. A silly mix, obviously not taking this one too seriously, but definitely some fun players. So much fun talking about the rounds as we went through there. Everyone, make sure to check out Ben's Substack, bengretch.substack.com, Stealing Signals, and get the Field Tippers piece, both the article that he has put out and the one that is upcoming. You won't want to miss those. We'd love to have you guys over at RotoViz right now. Grab the RotoViz 2026 Rookie Guide. We love you. We'll talk to you guys soon.